Before we dive into the next exciting story, drop a comment below and let me know, what time is it where you're watching from? I'm curious to see where everyone's tuning in from around the world. I've always loved the quiet. That's the real reason I camp alone and hike alone. It's not about proving anything to anyone. It's about the silence. The kind of silence that presses against you like a weight, smoothing out the chaos of everyday life. Out here, far from deadlines and the blaring traffic, I can hear my own thoughts. But it's a fragile thing, the peace that the wilderness offers. I've learned that the quiet can also play tricks on you, turn on you. That's what happened to me in the San Juan National Forest. I'd been camping alone plenty of times before, but this trip was different. I still have trouble putting it into words. All I know is that the silence stopped being my friend somewhere on the second day. I'd planned to be out there for 4 days, just long enough to clear my head and reset. The spot I'd picked was remote, a stretch of dense forest near Pagosa Springs that even the locals didn't visit often. It was perfect, or so I thought. The first day went like it always does. The drive up was uneventful, and after a few hours of hiking, I found the perfect campsite. It was tucked away by a creek, surrounded by towering pines with a small clearing just big enough for my tent and fire pit. I felt that familiar rush of excitement as I set up camp, the freedom of being out here completely alone, with nothing but wilderness around me. That first night was easy. I sat by the fire, listening to the water rush over the rocks in the creek. I wrote in my journal a bit, mostly just notes about the hike and some thoughts about work. Then I crawled into my tent, ready to sleep. The silence was comforting at first, as it always is, but I woke up in the middle of the night to something strange. It was subtle, just a faint whispering sound, like the wind picking up through the trees. I brushed it off, telling myself it was nothing, and eventually drifted back to sleep. The next day, things started to go wrong. I woke up later than I'd planned, the sky already a pale blue overhead. My stove was acting up, which was weird because it had worked fine the night before. It just wouldn't light, no matter what I tried. I ended up eating cold granola and packing up my camp, ready to move deeper into the forest. That's when I noticed my GPS wasn't working. I'd had reception when I camped here before, but now my phone was useless, no signal at all. I wasn't worried yet, though. I'd brought a map, and I knew the area well enough to navigate without technology. Still, the feeling that something wasn't right settled in, and I couldn't shake it. The hike was harder than I expected. My legs felt heavier, like the air itself was weighing me down, and the forest was quiet, too quiet. Normally, you'd hear birds or the occasional rustle of squirrels in the underbrush, but today, it was just still. The silence felt unnatural. I found another campsite by late afternoon, a little farther into the woods next to a meadow that looked untouched. I set up my tent quickly, eager to get a fire going, but as I worked, the feeling of being watched crept up on me. I couldn't shake it. Every time I glanced over my shoulder, nothing was there, just trees and shadows, but the sensation wouldn't leave. That night, I heard the whispers again. This time, they were louder, clearer, and they weren't random. They were saying something. My name. I sat up in my tent, my heart pounding. The sound was faint but unmistakable, drifting on the breeze from somewhere just beyond the clearing. I grabbed my flashlight, unzipped the tent, and shone the light into the trees. Nothing. The forest was still, the fire flickering in the corner of my vision. I stood there for a long time, listening, but the whispering had stopped. It was just the wind. It had to be. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. By the third day, I was exhausted. I hadn't slept much the night before, and the feeling of unease had only grown stronger. My gear wasn't cooperating either. When I tried to pack up my tent, I found that the poles had bent. They were new, barely used, but somehow they were warped, like something had twisted them while I slept. It didn't make sense. The whispering was back too, even during the day. It followed me as I hiked, and a faint sound on the edge of hearing, like someone walking just out of sight. I kept telling myself it was the wind, but deep down I knew something wasn't right. I wasn't alone out here. Then there was the whistling. It started around midday, just after I'd set up my third camp. At first I thought it was a bird, but the sound was too deliberate, too human. It came from somewhere deep in the woods, a high, clear note that echoed through the trees. I froze, listening. The sound grew louder, closer, then stopped as suddenly as it had begun. I called out, hoping it was another hiker, someone who'd stumbled across my camp, but there was no response, just silence. I tried to stay calm, but the sense of being watched was overwhelming. Now it felt like something was circling me, just beyond my vision, waiting. That night, the whispers didn't stop. I lay in my tent, wide awake, listening as the sound of my name drifted through the trees. It was faint at first, like it had been the night before, but as the hours passed, it grew louder, more insistent. Dylan. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside, the cold night air biting at my skin. The fire had died down, casting long, flickering shadows across the clearing. I scanned the trees, heart racing, but there was nothing. Just darkness. I was about to crawl back into my tent when I saw something move, a shadow slipping between the trees. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. It was too big to be an animal, and it was moving too deliberately, like it was watching me, waiting. I turned off my flashlight and backed into the tent, my mind racing. I'd never been this scared in the woods before. Not once in all the years I'd camped alone. But now, there was something out there. I could feel it. I zipped the tent shut and tried to calm my breathing, but the whispers were inside my head now. They weren't just outside. They were all around me. Dylan. Dylan. I didn't sleep at all that night. I sat in my tent, clutching the flashlight, listening as the whispers circled me. Sometimes it sounded like one voice, sometimes several, but it was always the same soft, insistent calling my name. By dawn, I couldn't take it anymore. I packed up my gear as quickly as I could, my hands shaking. I didn't care where I was going anymore. I just needed to get out of these woods. But as I started hiking, the whistling began again. This time it was closer, following me like something was walking just behind me, whistling a slow, eerie tune. I didn't stop to look. I didn't want to see whatever it was. I just kept walking, faster and faster, until I was practically running down the trail. But then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps behind me. I froze, heart pounding in my chest, and slowly turned around. There, standing just at the edge of the clearing, was a figure. It was tall and thin, its skin pale and stretched tight over its bones. Its eyes were hollow, and its lips were curled into a grin. It stood there, staring at me, its head cocked to the side as if amused. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The whistling had stopped, and now there was only silence. A silence so thick it pressed down on me like a weight. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching me, waiting. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen in place, but eventually I turned and ran. I ran until my legs burned and my lungs felt like they were going to burst. I didn't stop until I reached the trailhead where my car was parked. When I finally looked back, the figure was gone. I never told anyone what happened in the San Juan National Forest. Not really. I tried to explain it to myself 1,000 different ways. Exhaustion, anxiety, maybe even altitude sickness. But none of that explains the whispers, or the whistling, or the figure that watched me from the trees. I haven't been camping since. I pulled the RV off the narrow, dusty road and into the shadow of Dead Man's Gulch. The engine sputtered to a stop, and for a moment I sat there in silence, staring out at the barren valley stretching before me. The Ruby Mountains loomed in the distance, jagged and dark against the fading light. This was exactly what I wanted. Isolation, quiet, and a place where the world couldn't find me. The RV had become my escape after Laura died. I could roam wherever I wanted, park wherever I pleased, and it felt like a kind of freedom. But now, sitting here in the middle of nowhere, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The place had a weight to it, like the air was thick with something unseen, something waiting. I climbed out of the RV and stretched, the dry desert air biting at my skin as the temperature dropped with the setting sun. Dead Man's Gulch was as desolate as it sounded. I had read about it in a ghost stories book I found at a thrift store. Some legend about miners who disappeared back in the late 1800s. They supposedly saw shadowy figures in the valley at night before the earth collapsed and swallowed them whole. I didn't believe in ghosts, cryptids, or any of the nonsense locals spouted about this place. I just wanted to be alone, away from the pitying glances and endless condolences. No one understood how grief gnawed at you, hollowing you out until nothing was left. Setting up camp took about 15 minutes. I parked the RV next to the remnants of an old mining camp. A few rusted-out carts, the skeletal remains of a cabin, and a collapsed mine shaft disappearing into the hillside. It was perfect. No people, no distractions. Just me, the desert, and the stars. By the time I finished dinner, canned chili, nothing fancy, the sun had dipped below the horizon. I sat at the small table inside the RV, staring at the book in front of me, filled with old tales of ghost sightings and strange disappearances, most of them from around here. The locals called it the Phantom of the Mines, a shadowy creature that haunted the valleys, stalking anyone who got too close to the abandoned shafts. I flipped through the pages, skimming over accounts of miners swearing they'd seen something dark moving in the fog just before disaster struck. I shook my head and closed the book. Ghosts, shadows, it was all nonsense. Laura would have laughed at the idea. She'd never been scared of anything. Not the woods, not the wild. She was fearless. But I wasn't Laura. As I cleaned up, the RV's lights flickered. I paused, glancing at the ceiling. The lights steadied again, and I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Just a glitch, I told myself. The RV was old, things broke, but the air suddenly felt colder. When I glanced out the window, I swore I saw movement, something shifting in the darkness just beyond the headlights. I stepped outside, the crunch of gravel under my boots the only sound. The night was still, too still, the kind of quiet that presses down on you. I scanned the area, the beam from my flashlight cutting through the shadows. Nothing moved, just rocks, dirt, and the skeletal remains of the old mining camp. Then I heard it, faint, like the sound of gravel shifting underfoot. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I swung the flashlight toward the sound, but there was nothing there. "Get a grip, Jake," I muttered. "It's just the wind." I turned back toward the RV, ready to call it a night, until I saw them. Handprints. Long streaks of dust trailing down the windows, as if someone, or something, had dragged their fingers across the glass. My heart skipped a beat. I was alone. I knew that. No one had passed me on the road for hours. No one was out here. At least, no one should have been. I hurried inside, locking the door behind me. The RV felt smaller now, the walls pressing in as the wind outside picked up, howling through the narrow canyon. I sat at the table, staring at the window, waiting. But nothing happened. The next morning, the RV was completely dead. No power, no lights, no water pump, nothing. I checked the battery. It was completely drained. It didn't make sense. I had it checked before I left. It was supposed to last for weeks. Frustrated, I spent most of the day trying to figure out what was wrong. But everything seemed fine. The battery had just died. By late afternoon, I gave up. I was stuck here for the night. I cursed under my breath. But deep down, I knew this wasn't just bad luck. I decided to go for a walk, maybe clear my head. The old mine shaft loomed in the distance, and I made my way toward it. The ground was hard and cracked, littered with strange, deep marks crisscrossing the dirt. They looked like they'd been dragged by something large. Too large. At the mine's entrance, the air was cooler, thick with the smell of dust and rot. The opening had collapsed years ago, the rocks jagged and sharp. But there, in the dirt, were more of those strange marks. Long, deep gouges, like something had been clawing its way out. I backed away, chest tightening. It was just a mine, just old rocks and dirt. But as I turned to leave, I caught something in the corner of my eye, a shadow moving at the edge of the rocks. I whipped around. Nothing. I ran back to the RV, heart pounding. That night, the first knock came just after midnight, a loud, deliberate bang on the side of the RV. I shot up, grabbing the shotgun by my bed. My hands shook as I loaded it. Another bang, closer this time. "Who's there?" I shouted, voice cracking. No answer, just the sound of gravel shifting. I grabbed the flashlight and threw open the door. The cold hit me hard. The beam cut through the darkness. Nothing. No one. But then I saw it. A dark, shifting figure at the edge of the rocks. Its form flickered like smoke in the wind. It didn't have a face, but I felt its eyes on me. I raised the shotgun and fired. The blast echoed, but the thing didn't move. It just faded. I stumbled back inside, locking the door. The lights flickered and then went dark. I sat in total blackness, shotgun in my lap, waiting. But it didn't come back. By morning, I'd had enough. I packed up and climbed into the driver's seat. Miraculously, the RV started like nothing had been wrong. I didn't wait. I hit the gas, speeding away from Dead Man's Gulch. The weight in the air lifted. The fog was gone. But I couldn't shake the feeling I had narrowly escaped something dark, something still waiting in those mines. And as I drove, I kept checking the rearview mirror, just in case. The fog was thicker than I'd expected. I pulled my RV into a secluded clearing in Pisgah National Forest and stepped out into the damp air, the smell of wet earth heavy in my nose. Everything was muffled, as though the forest was holding its breath. The trees were shrouded in mist, their trunks fading into the gloom, and the trail I had heard so much about was hidden somewhere out there, waiting for me. I'd come here to find something unique. My vlog had been stagnating, and I needed a fresh angle. A fellow hiker had mentioned an unmarked trail, a path that didn't appear on any maps, one that locals said disappeared and reappeared as though it had a life of its own. Perfect. If I could document it and film the mystery, my audience would eat it up. I grabbed my camera and set it up, filming a quick introduction. Hey everyone, it's Nate here, and I'm in the middle of the misty Pisgah National Forest, about to track down the infamous Vanishing Trail. Legend says this path comes and goes, and people who wander too far down it don't come back. Let's see if that's true. I packed up my gear and set off into the fog. The forest was silent, the only sound my boots crunching on the damp leaves. I had a GPS in my pocket just in case, but I didn't plan to use it unless things got really bad. I wanted to go off the grid, find this mysterious trail, and see if there was anything to the rumors. I'd always been a skeptic. Ghost stories and folklore were fun to tell around a campfire, but not much else. As I walked, the fog thickened, swallowing the trees. It clung to my skin, cold and heavy. It wasn't long before I found the first strange marker, a stone slab jutting from the ground, its surface covered in symbols, strange spiraling shapes that didn't look like any language I knew. I filmed it, talking into the camera as I described the find. This looks like something from an old burial ground, but there's no mention of this on any maps. Really makes you wonder what else is out here, hidden beneath the fog. I kept moving, the trees closing in tighter. The trail I was following became fainter, more overgrown, and soon it was little more than a game trail, barely wide enough to follow. I pushed forward, keeping my camera rolling, but after another hour of hiking, the trail simply disappeared. One moment, there had been a clear path, and now it was gone, swallowed by the forest. The mist curled around the trees, thick and almost suffocating, but I was certain I'd been on the right trail. I checked my GPS, but the signal flickered weakly. The screen showed that I was in the middle of nowhere. No path, no landmarks, just a blank screen with a blinking dot. Me, standing alone in the fog. Okay, I muttered. You've dealt with worse. I turned back the way I'd come, but the forest looked different now. The trees seemed closer together, the undergrowth denser. The fog was disorienting, and I had to rely on instinct to retrace my steps. The GPS was useless. I kept walking, scanning the ground for signs of the trail, but there was nothing. I was starting to feel uneasy. That's when I heard it. Footsteps, not mine. I froze, listening. The sound came from deeper in the forest. Slow, deliberate footsteps crunching on the leaves. I turned, scanning the fog, but there was nothing, just the swirling mist. Then, out of the gloom, a figure emerged. An older man, his clothes tattered and damp, his eyes wide and vacant. Hey, I called, my voice echoing through the stillness. You lost too? The man looked at me for a moment, then shuffled forward. He seemed off. His clothes were torn, his face pale, and there was a distant look in his eyes, like he wasn't entirely there. I've been walking for days, he said, his voice hoarse. The trail, it keeps changing. Are you okay? I asked, stepping toward him. He shook his head. No one's okay out here. I frowned, feeling a cold knot of fear tighten in my stomach. What do you mean? The trail, it moves. I've seen it, watched it disappear and reappear. It's not just a path, it's the forest. It doesn't want us to leave. I stared at him, my mind racing. This guy was either delirious or onto something. Either way, I didn't like the way he was talking. Look, I said, pulling out my GPS. We can find our way back. The man glanced at the GPS, then back at me. It won't help. The forest is messing with it. I didn't believe him. I couldn't. I was a rational guy, and this was just a forest. I'd get us back to my RV, get him some help, and be done with it. But as we walked, things got stranger. The mist thickened, wrapping around the trees like a living thing. The forest seemed to shift with every step. What had been an open path a moment ago was now choked with brambles. When I looked back, the trees seemed to loom closer, twisting into unfamiliar shapes. The man, whose name I learned was Eli, grew more agitated with every passing minute. "It's watching us," he muttered. "It knows we're here." "Who's watching?" I asked, growing impatient. "The forest," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "It's alive, and it's been here long before we were." I ignored him, focusing on the GPS, but even that was failing me. The screen flickered, the signal cutting in and out. At one point, it showed me standing on a clear path, but when I looked up, there was nothing but trees. Thick, twisted trees that looked like they had grown there for centuries. We kept walking, the fog growing thicker, pressing in on us. The air felt heavy, almost suffocating, and then the whispers started. Faint at first, like the wind through the leaves, but then more distinct voices calling out from the mist. "Nate." I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. "Did you hear that?" I asked. Eli nodded, his eyes wide. "It's calling us the forest." I tried to shake it off, tell myself it was just the wind, but deep down I knew that wasn't true. The voice had spoken my name. We came across a backpack tangled in the branches of a tree, high above our heads. It was old, covered in dirt and torn, but when I climbed up to retrieve it, I found fresh supplies inside, water, food, like someone had packed it yesterday. I felt a chill run down my spine. How had it gotten there? Eli was growing more paranoid, his eyes darting around as though he expected the trees to come alive at any moment. "We need to leave," he kept saying, "before it's too late." We pushed forward, but no matter which direction we went, we ended up back where we started. The fog seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy, the whispers growing louder. Then, without warning, Eli was gone. I turned around, and he was just gone. The forest had swallowed him whole without a sound. I called out his name, but there was no response, only the dense mist pressing in on me. Panic set in. I was alone, lost in a forest that didn't want me to leave. The GPS was useless, and my camera was flickering, showing distorted footage of things I hadn't seen. Shadows moving in the trees, figures lurking just out of sight. I started running, my breath coming in sharp gasps. The trees twisted and shifted around me, the fog so thick I couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. Every time I thought I'd found a way out, the forest closed in, trapping me in a maze of branches and brambles. The whispers were louder now, calling my name over and over. My camera caught glimpses of movement, dark figures moving through the mist, vanishing before I could focus on them. I didn't know what was real anymore. The forest seemed to warp around me, bending reality to its will. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the fog broke. I stumbled out of the trees and found myself back at my RV. The mist lingered at the edge of the forest, but it didn't follow. I didn't wait. I grabbed my keys, threw my gear into the RV, and drove off, my hands shaking on the wheel. I didn't stop until I was miles away, the forest a distant memory in the rearview mirror. Back home, I reviewed the footage. I expected to see the horror I'd witnessed, the proof of the vanishing trail and the strange shifting forest. But the videos showed nothing. The trail looked normal. The mist wasn't as thick, and Eli wasn't in the footage at all. It was like he'd never existed. I tried to tell myself it had been a bad trip, that my mind had played tricks on me, but deep down I knew the truth. The forest had let me leave, but it hadn't forgotten me. And I had a feeling it was waiting somewhere in the mist for me to return. I wasn't supposed to be here, not really. Not in this forest, not sitting in this RV, staring at the tall trees outside, wondering if this trip would be my last. Gifford Pinchot National Forest had been Karen's idea, years ago. She had this way of looking at the world, seeing the beauty in everything. She wanted to camp here, hike the trails, soak in the stillness of the ancient trees. I didn't get it then. Too caught up in work, too busy to care. But now, it was all I had left. It had been a year since she died, and I still couldn't make sense of it. A car accident on a quiet street, just like that, she was gone, and I was left stumbling through life, trying to figure out how to exist without her. This trip was my last attempt at finding something, anything that made sense. So here I was, parked deep in the middle of nowhere, hoping that the forest would somehow offer answers. I didn't know what else to do. The trees stretched up into the sky, their thick trunks casting shadows that lingered even in the daylight. It was beautiful in a way, but it felt empty without her. I could almost hear her voice telling me to look at the wildflowers or marvel at the way the sunlight filtered through the branches. I stepped out of the RV. The cool, damp air wrapped around me. The scent of pine and moss was thick, earthy. Everything seemed so alive, and yet all I could feel was the weight of the past pressing down on me. I started a small fire, just like I'd done the past few nights, and sat there watching the flames dance. The crackling wood was the only sound in the stillness. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. They were faint, barely audible over the fire, but distinct enough to make me stand up, heart pounding in my chest. I looked around, scanning the tree line, but saw nothing, just shadows. I told myself it was probably a deer or maybe some other animal, but the feeling stuck, the sense that someone was watching me. I wasn't alone. I sat back down, trying to shake the unease, but it lingered. I couldn't stop thinking about the old man I'd met the day before. Edgar. He'd been wandering the campground when I arrived, his wrinkled face covered in a scruffy beard, eyes sharp despite his age. He was friendly enough, but there had been something off about him. "You came at the wrong time," he'd said, staring at me with a knowing look. "Why is that?" I'd asked, brushing it off. Some things shouldn't be disturbed, especially at night. The forest, it has its secrets. I didn't know what to say to that, so I didn't respond. But his words stuck with me, replaying in my mind as I sat by the fire. What did he mean by secrets? What was he talking about? I hadn't thought much of it at the time, but now, sitting in the dark with the fire flickering low, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to what he'd said. The wind picked up, making the trees sway, their branches creaking overhead. The fire sputtered as the breeze caught it, and I stood up again, feeling restless. I needed to move, to walk, anything to clear my head. I grabbed my flashlight and headed into the forest, just far enough to feel like I was doing something. The beam of light cut through the darkness, illuminating the trunks of the trees, but casting long shadows everywhere else. My footsteps were the only sound now, crunching softly on the forest floor. I don't know how far I walked before I saw the first symbol. It was carved into the bark of a tree, a spiral-like shape that looked old, weathered by time. I crouched down, running my fingers over it. It was smooth, unnaturally so, like it had been carved recently. I stood up, shining the light around, and spotted more symbols carved into the trees at odd intervals. Spirals, faces, shapes that made no sense. They all seemed to be pointing deeper into the forest, like a trail leading me somewhere. A chill ran down my spine. I turned back, trying to ignore the nagging curiosity that pulled at me. I wasn't here to chase after strange carvings. I was here to, well, I didn't know why I was here anymore, but this wasn't it. As I made my way back toward the RV, the air seemed heavier, colder. I couldn't hear the wind anymore, and the shadows seemed darker. The feeling that I was being watched returned, stronger this time, like someone or something was following me. My pulse quickened, and I picked up the pace, glancing over my shoulder every few steps. Nothing. Just trees and shadows. When I reached the RV, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The fire had gone out, leaving nothing but smoldering embers. I climbed inside, locked the door behind me, and sat on the edge of the bed, heart still racing. I was just tired. That's all it was. The grief, the isolation, it was messing with my head. I hadn't been sleeping well, and the loneliness had a way of playing tricks on the mind. At least that's what I told myself. The next morning, I met Leah. She was hiking near the campground, a pack slung over her shoulders, looking every bit the confident outdoors woman. She was friendly, outgoing, and struck up a conversation with me as soon as we crossed paths. "You camping out here alone?" she asked, her voice light, casual. I nodded. "Yeah, needed some time away, I guess." "I get that," she said, smiling. "This place is something else. It's beautiful, but it can get a little weird at night, don't you think?" I paused, remembering the footsteps, the carvings, Edgar's warnings. "Weird?" I asked. "How strange it can feel out here after dark. Just stories, old legends, you know how it is with places like this. Every forest has its ghost stories." I tried to keep my tone neutral. but the unease from the night before still lingered. She smiled again, but this time there was something in her eyes, like she knew more than she was letting on. "Just be careful. It's easy to get lost out here," she said. With that, she waved and continued down the trail, disappearing into the trees. I watched her go, wondering if I should have said more, asked her what she meant, but I didn't. I spent the rest of the day at camp, trying to relax, but the sense of unease only grew stronger. That night, as I sat by the fire again, I couldn't stop thinking about the symbols. They'd seemed so deliberate, so purposeful, like someone or something was trying to lead me deeper into the woods. And then the footsteps returned. This time, they were louder, closer. I stood up, shining my flashlight toward the trees, but saw nothing, just shadows. But the footsteps didn't stop. They circled the RV, slow, deliberate, crunching on the forest floor. My throat tightened as I strained to listen, my heart hammering in my chest. "Who's there?" I called out, but the footsteps didn't answer. Instead, they stopped. Dead silence. I backed toward the RV, fumbling for the door when I saw it. Movement, just at the edge of the trees. A figure, tall, thin, barely visible in the darkness. I blinked and it was gone. I bolted inside, slamming the door behind me, my breath coming in short gasps. What the hell was happening? I sat there for hours, staring at the door, waiting for something to happen, but nothing did. The next morning, Leah was gone. Her tent was still there, her pack sitting neatly outside, but she was nowhere to be found. I searched the area, calling her name, but the forest was silent. It didn't make sense. People didn't just vanish like that, not without a trace. I thought about Edgar, about the stories he'd told, the forgotten one he'd called it, a legend about a man who'd wandered too far into the forest, losing himself until he became part of the land itself. Now they said he lured others to join him, preying on their grief, their loneliness until they disappeared too. I didn't believe it. I couldn't. But Leah was gone, and the symbols were still there, etched into the trees like a warning or an invitation. The footsteps returned that night, and this time I knew what they wanted. I could hear her voice, Karen's voice, calling to me from the trees. Soft, loving, like she was right there, waiting for me. "Derek," she whispered, "come find me." My heart ached, torn between the impossible and the undeniable. I knew it wasn't real. I knew it, but I wanted to believe it was. I stepped outside. The cold air bit at my skin. The forest was dark, silent, but the voice was there, guiding me. I walked toward the trees, my feet moving on their own, drawn by the sound of her voice. "Derek," she called again. "Don't leave me." I stopped at the edge of the woods, staring into the darkness. I could see her now, just beyond the first row of trees. Her face, her smile. She was there, waiting for me. But something was wrong. The shadows around her shifted, twisting like they were alive. Her eyes, once warm and familiar, were hollow, empty. I took a step back, the spell breaking. This wasn't Karen. I turned and ran back to the RV, back to safety. The forest seemed to close in around me, the trees pressing in as the voice grew louder, angrier. "Derek!" I slammed the door behind me, heart pounding, breath coming in ragged gasps. I could still hear her screaming my name from the trees, but I didn't go back. I couldn't. I left Gifford Pinot the next morning, the RV's engine sputtering to life as I drove away. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The forest had its secrets. I wasn't meant to know them. And whatever it was out there, whatever the forgotten one truly was, it would stay there, waiting for someone else. I've always prided myself on being the guy who keeps his cool no matter what. That's why I was leading this trip deep into the Blackwater Ridge, Manala National Forest. It was supposed to be a challenge, and I was ready for it. I'd hiked dozens of trails tougher than this, and I wanted to prove that to my old friends, especially Nate, who couldn't even set up a tent without breaking a sweat. But there's something about being miles away from civilization, surrounded by nothing but endless trees, that starts to mess with your head. As soon as we arrived, I could feel it. Not that I'd let anyone see that, of course. "Kara, you got the map?" I called out as we packed up the last of the gear. "Yep, but I doubt we'll need it with you in charge," she winked, slinging her backpack over her shoulder. I grinned. She knew how to stroke my ego, one of the things I loved about her. Nate, on the other hand, was struggling to adjust the straps of his pack. His face was already red, and we hadn't even started walking yet. Can we take it slow, guys? I haven't done this in a while. Sure, Nate. We'll pace ourselves, I said, trying to hide my impatience. Sarah, ever the practical one, rolled her eyes but said nothing. She was the scientist of the group, the one who'd be lecturing us about rare plants and ecosystems halfway up the trail. She was here more for research than the hike, but I knew she could handle herself. We hit the trailhead late in the morning, the sun already filtering through the thick canopy above. The first couple of miles were easy enough. Well marked, a few uphill climbs, nothing too rough. Nate fell behind pretty quickly, as expected, but we made enough stops to let him catch up. By the time we reached our first campsite, the air had a heavy, oppressive feel. The sun dipped below the trees, casting long, eerie shadows across the forest floor. The dense foliage seemed to swallow up the light, leaving us in a strange twilight. We set up camp without much trouble, although Nate complained about the weight of his gear the whole time. Our tents were cheap, sure, but they did the job. Sarah was meticulous, making sure her tent was perfectly aligned with the slope of the ground. It's gonna rain tomorrow, she said almost as an afterthought. Clear skies right now, I pointed out, but she just shrugged. Night came quickly, faster than I expected. By the time we had the fire going, the forest had gone almost completely silent. No birds, no insects, just the crackling of the fire and the occasional rustling of leaves. It was weird. I'd been in plenty of forests, but something about this one felt off. You guys hear that? Nate said, glancing around nervously. Hear what? Kara asked, stirring the pot of stew she'd made over the fire. No, it's like, I don't know, like something moving out there. I paused, listening. At first there was nothing, but then I heard it too, soft, distant, and low. A growl, almost like the sound of a heavy breath. Coyotes, I said, trying to sound confident. Nothing to worry about. They're probably more scared of us than we are of them. But I saw Sarah tense up. She was studying the woods beyond the firelight, her face set in concentration. I didn't like that. When I turned back to Nate, he was pale, fidgeting with his hands. Maybe we should keep the fire going all night, he said. Relax, Nate. We're fine. Nothing's coming near us. But the truth was, something felt off. Even I couldn't shake it. The second day was rough. The terrain started to get steeper, and the trail was less defined. Nate was falling behind more often, and Kara's enthusiasm was starting to wane. We pressed on, but there was a growing sense of unease that none of us could shake. Halfway through the day, we found something that made me stop in my tracks. A deer carcass, ripped apart and strewn across the trail. Blood, dark and congealed, soaked into the ground around it. Whatever had killed it wasn't hunting for food. It looked like something had torn it apart just for the hell of it. Nate gagged, turning away. What the hell? Kara knelt beside the body, her face a mix of curiosity and horror. This wasn't a bear. Look at the size of these tracks. I crouched down next to her. She was right. The prints were huge, human-like, but twisted. Something was wrong with the feet. Long, deep claw marks gouged into the dirt. I glanced at Sarah. Her face was pale, her brow furrowed in deep concern. This isn't normal, she whispered. We should go back. The confident TJ, who could handle anything, suddenly felt a sliver of doubt crawl up his spine. Nah, we're fine, I said, brushing it off. It's just some animal. We'll be careful. Let's keep moving. But I knew, we all knew, something was out there, watching. That night was worse. We set up camp earlier just as the sky began to darken. The wind picked up, carrying a strange metallic scent, something foul. The air felt heavy, thick with unexplainable dread. The fire crackled low, throwing flickering shadows on the tents, but none of us felt the comfort of its warmth. We sat closer than usual, even Nate, who had barely spoken since we found the deer. I sat there gripping the handle of my knife, trying to tell myself I was just being paranoid. But when I looked at the faces of my friends, I knew I wasn't the only one feeling it. Do you hear that? Sarah said suddenly, her voice barely a whisper. We all went silent, listening. At first there was nothing but the wind in the trees. Then I heard it. A low, guttural growl, closer this time. What the hell is that? Nate's voice cracked, his eyes wide with fear. It's just an animal. I said again, though I wasn't sure who I was trying to convince anymore. But it wasn't. We all knew that. This was something different, something wrong. From the shadows beyond the firelight, something moved. It was fast, so fast I barely caught a glimpse. But I saw enough. A tall, hunched figure just beyond the ring of light, watching us. Its eyes glowed bright and unnatural. Kara stood up. "I'm gonna check it out." "No," Sarah hissed, grabbing her arm. "Stay here. Don't be stupid." But Kara, always fearless, shook her off and stepped into the darkness. "Kara," I shouted, grabbing my flashlight. I scanned the darkness. Then I saw it. A tall, gaunt creature with dark, leathery skin and glowing red eyes. It lunged. Kara screamed. We ran, and we never saw her again. I thought the desert would heal me. Red Rock Canyon was supposed to be a place to clear my head, to sit in silence and let the vast, empty land take away the chaos of the last few months. I'd lost everything, my wife, my job, and I needed something, anything, to remind me there was still some peace left in the world. Instead, it felt like I'd driven into a nightmare. I parked the RV at the far end of the campground, as far away from the few other campers as I could get. I wanted solitude to think, or maybe to stop thinking. I wasn't sure. The sun was setting as I stepped out, casting a deep orange glow across the red sandstone cliffs. It was beautiful, the kind of beauty that made you feel small, like the world was too big for you to matter. Maybe that's what I needed. I'd been driving for hours, with only the occasional crackle of the radio for company. The RV was old, creaking and groaning as I navigated the winding roads into the canyon. It had seen better days, much like me. As I stretched, a low rumble came from under the hood. "Great," I muttered, giving the RV a half-hearted kick. The engine had been acting up for days, but I figured I could deal with it later. I wasn't here for that. I was here to get away, to let the emptiness of the desert swallow me whole. That night, after I'd settled in, I sat outside the RV, staring up at the stars. Out here, away from the city, the sky was incredible. Clear, endless. But as the stars twinkled overhead, I noticed something strange. At first, I thought they were planes, blinking in and out far above the canyon. But then they moved too fast, too erratically. I leaned forward, squinting. There were 3 of them, glowing faintly blue, darting through the sky in impossible patterns. They weren't planes. I wasn't sure what they were. I stood up, straining my neck to follow their path as they circled overhead. They blinked off one by one, and the desert was silent again. Just stars, I told myself, even though I knew it wasn't true. The next morning, I woke up to find the RV's battery almost dead. My phone, which I'd left charging overnight, hadn't gained a single bar. I tried turning the engine over, but all I got was a dull click. My chest tightened. Being stranded in the middle of the desert wasn't part of the plan. I had enough food and water for a few days, sure, but the isolation was starting to feel less like a retreat and more like a trap. Milo's RV was parked a few spots down, his beat-up RV sitting in the shade of a large rock formation. He waved me over as I stepped out of mine, a wide grin on his sunburned face. "Morning," he called. "Beautiful day, huh?" I forced a smile. "Yeah, sure. Hey, you wouldn't happen to have jumper cables, would you?" Milo scratched his scruffy chin, then shook his head. "Sorry, friend, but I can give you a ride into town later if you need help. It's not too far." I thanked him, but something about Milo unsettled me. Maybe it was how relaxed he seemed, like this place wasn't bothering him at all. As I stood there, he tilted his head toward the canyon walls. "You see the lights last night?" he asked. I froze. "Yeah, what were they?" He shrugged like it was nothing. "Oh, those things. People talk about them all the time. Could be military, could be something else. No one really knows, but they've been around as long as I've been camping out here." I laughed nervously. "Something else, huh?" Milo smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "People say they're not from this world. I don't know about that, but sometimes they follow you. Just don't go too far out at night and you'll be fine." I forced another laugh, but my stomach churned. Milo's tone was too casual, too accepting. I thanked him again and went back to my RV, trying to shake off the feeling that I was missing something important. The day dragged on, the heat baking the ground beneath my feet. I spent the afternoon hiking a short trail near the campground, trying to clear my head, but the vast emptiness only made me feel more alone. I kept thinking about the lights, about how they'd moved, how they seemed to watch me. That night, they returned. I was sitting outside again, nursing a warm beer and staring at the sky when I saw them, 3 faint blue lights hovering over the canyon. This time, they were closer. Too close. They flickered almost playfully, darting back and forth like they were searching for something. I stood up, my heart pounding. It didn't make sense. Nothing about this place made sense. I backed toward the RV, never taking my eyes off the lights, but as I reached for the door, the lights blinked out. Gone, just like that. A cold breeze swept through the canyon, and I shivered. It was too quiet. No wind, no insects, nothing. Just the dead, suffocating silence of the desert. Then the RV lights flickered once, twice, and went dark. My chest tightened as I stumbled into the RV, fumbling for the flashlight. I clicked it on, but the beam was weak, barely cutting through the darkness. The electrical panel was dead, and my phone wouldn't turn on. Every piece of technology I had was failing, and I had no idea why. A sudden knock on the door made me jump. "Chris, you okay?" It was Emily, the hiker I'd met earlier that day. She'd pitched her tent nearby, planning to stay for a few nights before heading out. I opened the door, trying to hide my panic. "Yeah, just some electrical issues," I said, forcing a smile. "Everything's dead. I'm guessing the battery's shot." Emily frowned, glancing back at her tent. "That's weird. My phone's dead too, and my flashlight keeps flickering." Her voice was calm, but I could see the worry in her eyes. She felt it too, the strangeness in the air, the weight of the silence. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Do you think it's the lights?" Milo told me about them earlier, said people disappear sometimes. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my breathing steady. "Disappear?" Emily nodded, her gaze drifting toward the canyon. "Yeah, it's mostly stories, but you seem pretty convinced." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The air felt thick, heavy, like the desert was closing in on us. I wasn't sure if I believed in Milo's campfire tales, but the lights, they were real and they weren't natural. "We should get out of here," Emily said, breaking the silence. "I don't like this." "I can't," I replied. "My RV won't start." She hesitated, then nodded. "Mine either. I tried earlier, but it's completely dead." We stood there, staring at each other, the weight of the situation sinking in. Something was wrong with this place. The lights weren't just an oddity, they were doing something, affecting everything around us, and we were stuck miles from any help. "We'll wait till morning," I said, trying to sound confident. "Maybe it's just a temporary glitch. We'll figure it out." Emily didn't look convinced, but she nodded and headed back to her tent. I locked the RV door behind her, though I wasn't sure what good it would do. That night, I barely slept. The silence was oppressive, like a blanket wrapped too tight around me. Every creak of the RV, every gust of wind made my heart race. I kept waiting for the lights to come back, to hover outside my window, but they didn't. Instead, I woke up sometime in the early hours, drenched in sweat, my head pounding. I sat up, blinking in the darkness. Something was wrong. I glanced at my watch. It was 4 a.m., but that didn't make sense. I'd checked the time just moments ago, and it had been midnight. Where had the hours gone? I stumbled outside, feeling disoriented. The air was cooler now, the desert's chill settling in. The stars were out, but there was no sign of the lights. My mind was foggy, like I'd been dreaming. But the dust on my boots told me I'd been walking. But where? And why? Panic surged through me. I couldn't remember. Hours were missing, and I had no idea what had happened. The lights were playing with us, toying with our sense of reality. I ran toward Emily's tent, calling her name, but when I got there, she was gone. Her tent was empty, her pack still there, but she was nowhere to be found. "Emily!" I shouted, my voice echoing off the canyon walls. Nothing. The only sound was the wind. I backed away, my heart hammering in my chest. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. But the lights, the missing time, it all pointed to one terrifying conclusion. We weren't alone. I sprinted back to my RV, slamming the door behind me, and tried the engine again. To my shock, it roared to life. The headlights flickered on, and I didn't hesitate. I jammed the gear shift into drive and tore out of the campsite, gravel kicking up behind me as I sped down the winding canyon road. I glanced in the rearview mirror for just a second. I saw them, the blue lights, hovering in the distance, watching me leave. I didn't stop driving until I hit the outskirts of Las Vegas. The neon lights of the city felt like a lifeline. But even then, as I pulled into a gas station, my hands shaking, I couldn't shake the feeling that the lights were still out there, waiting, and I wasn't sure if I'd really escaped at all. There's a kind of silence that creeps up on you when you're driving long stretches of road at night. The engine hums, the tires hiss against the pavement, and everything else just falls away into the dark. I used to like that silence, back when the road was a refuge, a way to keep the past buried. Now, though, that silence had taken on a different weight. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting out there in the fog. My name's Jack Evans, slick to those who know me well, and I've been hauling loads across this country for over 15 years. Before that, I worked as a commercial diver, recovering lost cargo off the coast, but the sea and I had fallen out. I thought getting into trucking would keep me far away from the water. Funny how life has a way of dragging you back to the places you least want to go. Tonight, I was hauling a sealed container bound for a shipyard near Bar Harbor, Maine. Simple job, no questions asked, just get it there. The kind of job I used to take without a second thought. But the client's vagueness about the cargo and the extra cash to stay quiet left a sour taste in my mouth. Still, money's money, and I wasn't one to dig too deep. The fog rolled in thick as I drove north along Route 1, the coastal highway running parallel to the sea. I knew this stretch of road well enough to navigate it blind, but tonight the fog seemed thicker, heavier. The GPS had started acting up about an hour ago, rerouting me onto older, narrower roads. I assumed it was just a glitch. Old systems didn't handle the coastal areas too well. But now, my gut was telling me something else. As I passed another turnoff toward the cliffs, the GPS blipped again, rerouting me to an unnamed road that curved down toward the coast. My knuckles whitened around the wheel as I considered pulling over to reset the system. Something was wrong. The hairs on the back of my neck prickled, the kind of feeling you get right before a storm hits. Just then, the CB radio crackled to life. Jack. The voice was faint, distorted, as if it was coming from underwater. My stomach tightened. No one was supposed to be on this frequency. Hell, I hadn't talked to anyone in hours. Jack, help me. I snatched the mic off the dash and keyed it up, trying to keep my voice steady. Who is this? Just static. I stared at the radio, willing it to stay quiet, but the voice came through again. This time, clearer, like the static was peeling away. Jack, why didn't you come back? I slammed the mic down and tried to focus on the road, but the memory of that voice hit me hard. It couldn't be. It was impossible. But it sounded just like Dave, my old diving partner, the guy who drowned 6 years ago in that accident. The accident I'd been running from ever since. Get a grip, Slick, I muttered, rubbing a hand across my face. The long hours on the road, the fog, it was all getting to me. That's what it had to be, just the past sneaking up, trying to claw its way back into my head. But the voice, it was so real. I pushed the pedal down, speeding up as the road twisted and dipped closer to the coastline. The fog was thicker here, swirling in dense, wet waves, and the smell of salt water filled the air. The engine sputtered just for a second before roaring back to life. Another bad sign. And then I saw them. Lights, blinking faintly just off the edge of the road where the cliffs dropped down to the sea. At first, I thought it was a boat. Fishing trawlers sometimes got too close to shore in the fog. But these lights weren't moving. They hovered low and pale, just out of reach, dancing through the mist like they were waiting for me. I slowed the truck, squinting through the windshield, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The lights pulsed rhythmically, almost in time with the steady hum I'd been hearing in the cab for the last few miles. That hum, low, eerie, was coming from the trailer. I'd noticed it earlier, but now it felt more like a heartbeat. A slow, rhythmic thump vibrating through the entire rig. I gritted my teeth and pressed on, ignoring the cold knot forming in my gut. Whatever was in that container, it was none of my business. I just had to deliver it and be done with it. But the lights, the fog, the voice on the radio, it all felt like the past was creeping up behind me, wrapping its icy fingers around my throat. Jack! The voice hit me again, this time loud and clear, like Dave was sitting in the passenger seat. I nearly swerved off the road, my heart pounding in my chest. Stop it! I growled, slamming my hand against the dash. You're not real. But the voice didn't stop. It crackled through the sea, an echo of the past I'd spent years trying to forget. You left me down there, Jack. You left me to drown. The memories hit hard and fast, the dive, the tangled wreck, the moment I lost sight of Dave in the murky depths. I tried to save him, but the currents were too strong. His voice had faded, swallowed by the sea, and now here it was, back to haunt me. The road narrowed, and the fog pressed in closer, suffocating. My truck's engine sputtered again, the headlights flickering. I pulled over, heart racing. The hum from the trailer grew louder, more insistent. Whatever was in that container, it wasn't just cargo, it was something alive, something old. I stepped out of the cab, the cold air biting at my skin as I walked around to the back of the truck. The fog clung to everything, thick and wet, muffling the world in a heavy silence. The lights over the water had disappeared, but I could still feel them watching me. The hum was louder here, vibrating through the trailer walls. I reached for the lock, my hand trembling. Part of me knew I shouldn't open it. The other part, the part that was tired of running, needed to know what I was hauling. As I unlocked the container, a voice whispered in my ear, "Come back, Jack." The doors swung open with a metallic creak, and inside, bathed in a faint, otherworldly glow, was an object, an artifact. It looked ancient, carved from dark stone, with strange symbols etched into its surface. The hum was coming from it, pulsating like a heartbeat, sending ripples of energy through the air. I took a step back, the realization sinking in like a weight in my chest. This thing wasn't just cargo. It was something tied to the sea, something old and powerful, and it had been calling to me all night. The fog swirled around me, thickening, and I felt a presence, multiple presences, moving through it. Figures, humanoid but distorted, like they were submerged in water, appeared at the edges of the road. Their eyes glowed faintly, and their movements were slow, deliberate as they waded through the fog toward me. I stumbled back, my pulse racing. The figures grew closer, their shapes becoming clearer. Fishermen, divers, sailors, all of them dripping with seawater, their faces pale and bloated. And among them I saw Dave. His eyes locked on mine, his expression blank, his hand outstretched. "You left me." His voice echoed in my head. "You left me to die." I backed away, but the sea's pull was too strong. The hum from the artifact grew louder, and the figures closed in, their voices mingling with the wind, calling me back to the water, back to the depths where I'd lost Dave. "I'm sorry," I whispered, my breath fogging in the cold air. I tried to save you." Dave's expression didn't change, but his hand dropped. The figures stopped, hovering at the edge of the road. The hum from the artifact slowed, the vibrations easing. The fog, heavy and thick, began to lift. And then, just as quickly as they had appeared, the figures dissolved into the mist, leaving me alone on the road. I closed the trailer doors, locking the artifact inside, and climbed back into the cab. The engine sputtered to life, and I pulled away from the coast, leaving the fog and the ghosts behind. The road stretched out ahead, empty and quiet, but the weight in my chest remained. The sea wasn't done with me. Not yet. And neither was Dave. That night, as I drove into the sunrise, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd only just scratched the surface of something far deeper, something I couldn't escape. The road may have saved me this time, but the echoes from the deep were still calling. "6 months in the Smokies. 6 months. 6 whole months without touching a drop. I should have been proud, right? But sitting alone in this RV, deep in the Great Smoky Mountains, I didn't feel proud. I felt restless, empty. Even the kind of empty that creeps up on you, settling in your bones when there's nothing but the sound of your own thoughts bouncing around your skull. This trip was supposed to be a celebration, a gift to myself for staying clean. I thought the solitude would help me clear my head, maybe give me some perspective. The Smokies had always been a place of peace for me. My dad used to take me camping here when I was a kid, back when life was simple before the bottle got its hooks into me. I pulled out my phone, flicking through pictures of those old trips. My thumb hesitated over the last photo of my dad and me standing by a roaring campfire. That was before everything went to hell, before the drinking became my escape from everything I couldn't face. The phone buzzed, pulling me back to the present. It was my brother, Jake, checking in as usual. "Hey man," he said when I answered. "How's the trip? You hanging in there?" Jake was always the responsible one, clean-cut, married with kids, a steady job. He'd been my lifeline after the wreckage of my addiction. I owed him more than I could ever repay. "Yeah, it's good," I lied. "Just me and the trees. Peaceful." You staying out of trouble? I chuckled. I'm not exactly near any temptations out here, I said. I didn't tell him about the bottle I'd brought with me. It sat in the back of the RV, unopened, but still there, just in case. A cruel comfort. I'd stared at it more than once already, the amber liquid calling to me in the quiet. Good to hear, Jake said, though I could hear the doubt in his voice. Just keep your head straight, all right? I know it's tough being out there alone, but you got this. Call me if you need anything. I will. Thanks. I ended the call and tossed the phone onto the bed. The sun was setting outside, casting long shadows through the trees. The sky faded from a soft orange to deep purple, and with it, the familiar sense of isolation began to settle in. The first night in the Smokies should have been serene, but as soon as the darkness took over, I felt it. The unease. The forest around me was too quiet. It was like it was holding its breath. No wind, no rustling leaves, just the faint crackle of my campfire outside. I sat at the picnic table near the fire, trying to relax, but the silence only seemed to grow heavier. I poked at the flames with a stick, hoping they'd somehow keep the stillness at bay. Then I heard it. A whistle. Faint at first, like a breeze cutting through the trees, but unmistakably human. I froze, listening. It was tuneless, just a single drawn-out note that seemed to float through the air. I scanned the tree line, but there was nothing. No movement. No one else was supposed to be this far out. I'd parked in a secluded area of the park, away from the main trails. The whistling continued, soft but constant. Probably just the wind, I muttered to myself, but even as I said it, I knew that wasn't true. It didn't sound like wind. It sounded deliberate. I stood, the hairs on the back of my neck prickling, and slowly circled the fire. I kept the flames between me and the trees, my eyes darting between the dark shapes of the pines. The whistle came again, louder this time, closer. My heart hammered in my chest, the familiar anxiety clawing its way up my throat. "Who's there?" I called, my voice breaking the thick silence. No response, just another long, drawn-out whistle. I grabbed my flashlight from the RV and swept the beam through the trees. The light cut through the darkness, but all I saw were shadows. No footsteps, no crunch of leaves, just that damn whistling drifting through the trees like a ghost. I didn't sleep much that night. The next day, I tried to convince myself it was nothing. It had to be nothing, right? Just a trick of the wind. The mountains could be strange like that, especially at night. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The bottle of whiskey in the back of the RV started to look more and more appealing, but I shoved that thought down. I wasn't here for that. Not this time. To clear my head, I went for a hike, following a trail that wound through the dense forest. The air was crisp, the smell of pine and damp earth filling my lungs. For a while, it worked. I could almost forget about the night before. Almost. That's when I saw the first marking. It was carved into the bark of a tree, a rough, jagged symbol that looked like a spiral or maybe an eye. I couldn't tell. It didn't look natural, though. It felt intentional, like a warning. I ran my fingers over it, the grooves deep and uneven. I kept walking, but the further I went, the more of the symbols I saw, spirals, faces, strange runes carved into the trees, all leading deeper into the woods. It felt like they were guiding me somewhere, though I wasn't sure I wanted to find out where. That night, the whistling returned. I was sitting by the fire again, trying to keep my mind off the bottle when the sound came drifting through the trees. This time it wasn't soft. It was louder, closer. I stood up, flashlight in hand, and scanned the forest. My heart pounded in my ears. My mouth went dry. The whistling seemed to circle the campsite, moving slowly but deliberately. It was all I could hear, filling the silence like a haunting lullaby. I turned, and that's when I saw him. Standing just beyond the tree line was a figure. A man, gaunt and pale, his hollow eyes fixed on me. He stood motionless, his lips pursed as he whistled that same eerie, tuneless note. "Hey!" I called, my voice cracking. "What do you want?" The figure didn't respond. He just stood there, watching me. The whistling grew louder, more insistent, cutting through the night air like a knife. I took a step toward him, but as soon as I moved, he turned and disappeared into the trees. My hands were shaking. I wasn't sure if it was fear or something else, something deeper. I felt the urge to chase him, to follow that haunting sound, but my legs refused to move. I stayed by the fire until dawn, too scared to go back inside the RV. The next day, I tried to leave. I packed up my gear, grabbed the keys to the RV, and decided I'd had enough of the Smokies. But when I tried to start the engine, it wouldn't turn over, just a dull click. I swore under my breath, popped the hood, and checked the battery. Everything looked fine, but the damn thing wouldn't start. I tried calling Jake, but my phone was dead. I'd charged it the night before, but now it was completely drained. No signal, no service, nothing. The forest around me felt suffocating. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, waiting just beyond the trees. The whistling started again, faint at first, then growing louder like a taunting melody. I grabbed the bottle from the back of the RV. I wasn't going to drink it, not yet. But holding it made me feel better, more in control, as if I could use it as a weapon somehow. That night, the stranger came back. I woke up to the sound of whistling, loud, sharp, right outside the RV. I sat up, heart pounding, and looked out the window. He was standing by the fire pit, his pale face illuminated by the flames. His eyes were fixed on me, unblinking, and that awful whistling filled the air, pressing in on me from all sides. He took a step toward the RV, and I felt the panic rise in my chest. I grabbed the bottle, holding it like a club, and stumbled outside. The air was freezing, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The whistling pierced through my skull, making it hard to think. I raised the bottle, ready to throw it, but then something stopped me. For the first time in days, I heard something else. A voice, faint but real. Jake's voice. "Nick, don't do it." I blinked, shaking my head. The stranger was gone. The whistling had stopped, and there, in the silence, I realized what I had been about to do. The bottle slipped from my hands and shattered on the ground. I dropped to my knees, gasping for air, the weight of everything crashing down on me. The whistling was gone, but the fear, the isolation, it wasn't something I could run from. Not out here. Not anywhere. When the sun rose, I tried the RV again. This time, it started. I drove out of the Smokies that morning, not looking back. The whistling stayed behind, lost in the trees, but the memory of it, the temptation, would stay with me. 6 months sober. But this trip taught me something I hadn't been ready to face. Some demons don't live in bottles. They live in the silence, in the spaces we create for ourselves when we're trying to hide from the world. The road into the Adirondacks was long, winding, and empty, just how I liked it. After a few hours of driving, I pulled the RV off the narrow trail and into a small clearing by the lake. The pines stretched high and thick around me, their dark green needles blending into the overcast sky. This was exactly what I needed, complete isolation. No people, no noise, just the quiet of the forest and the sound of my own thoughts. I parked the RV, turned off the engine, and stepped outside. The air was cool, crisp, with the faint smell of pine and damp earth. The only sound was the occasional rustling of leaves in the breeze and the distant ripple of water. Perfect. This place would give me the quiet I craved, a chance to think without the distractions of civilian life. Ever since leaving the military, I'd been chasing peace, and this felt like it could be the spot where I'd finally find it. I grabbed my gear and went about setting up camp. It didn't take long. I'd done this enough times to know the routine: gather firewood, get a small fire going, and make sure the RV was ready for a night out in the wilderness. As I made my way through the trees, something caught my eye. On one of the nearby trunks, there was a strange marking, a crude carving of a figure, long and thin, etched into the bark. I frowned, running my fingers over it. Just a kid's prank, I figured, probably a bored hiker from weeks ago. But as I moved through the forest gathering wood, I found more of them. Carved figures on the trees, all tall and slender, stretching higher than any human could reach. It was strange, but I wasn't here to think about strange things. I was here to forget. By the time the sun set, the fire was crackling softly, casting flickering light across the clearing. I settled in, next to the warmth, staring out at the darkening forest. There was a peace in the solitude, something comforting about being alone with the sounds of the wilderness. But as the night wore on, I started to notice something. The forest was too quiet. No rustling leaves, no night animals scurrying about, just silence. And then, just beyond the edge of the firelight, I heard it. A soft rustling sound, like something moving through the underbrush. I sat up, scanning the darkness with my flashlight. Nothing. The beam of light cut through the trees, but there was no movement, no sign of anything unusual. I shook my head. "You're just on edge," I muttered to myself, trying to dismiss the tension building in my chest. The wilderness could play tricks on you if you let it. I knew that better than most. I was here to clear my head, not to let it run wild. But then I saw it. At the edge of my vision, just for a split second, something moved. Tall, thin, just beyond the trees. I jumped to my feet, gripping the flashlight tighter, and aimed the beam toward where I'd seen the figure. But there was nothing, only the dark outline of the pines swaying slightly in the wind. I stood there, heart pounding in my chest, every muscle tense, waiting for something to step out of the shadows. But after a long moment, the rustling stopped. The trees swayed, and the forest fell back into its unsettling quiet. I forced myself to sit back down, staring into the fire, trying to shake off the feeling that someone or something was watching me. The next morning I woke early, determined to shake off the nerves from the night before. I grabbed my gear and decided to hike deeper into the woods. Maybe if I put some distance between myself and the campsite, I could clear my head. The trail was faint, barely more than a thin path winding through the trees. As I walked, I found more of the carvings on the trees, each one stranger than the last. They were everywhere, slender, elongated figures with no faces, all staring outward, all watching. The forest felt darker here, the canopy thick enough that the sunlight barely broke through. About an hour in, I reached a ridge overlooking the valley. The view was stunning, endless trees stretching out below, the mountains rising in the distance. I was about to pull out my camera when I heard footsteps behind me. "Morning," a voice said. I turned to see an older man, probably in his 60s, standing a few feet away. He was holding a bundle of firewood in his arms, his face weathered and sun-creased like someone who'd spent his entire life outdoors. "Didn't expect to see anyone out here," I said, giving him a nod. "Not many people come this deep in the forest," the man replied, his voice low and rough. He looked me up and down, then glanced toward the valley. "You camping nearby?" "Yeah, just over by the lake, trying to get some quiet." He gave me a long look, his expression unreadable. "You should be careful. This part of the Adirondacks, it's different." "Different how?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. He glanced around, his eyes flicking nervously toward the trees. "There's something in these woods. People call it the Watcher. It stays deep in the forest, watching from the shadows. You see it once and you'll start seeing it everywhere." I laughed, shaking my head. "Local ghost stories." The man didn't smile. "It's not a story. It's real. People who see the Watcher, they don't come back the same." He took a step closer. "I'm telling you this because you look like you've seen things. You know when something's not right and something's not right here." I met his gaze, feeling that familiar knot of unease tightening in my gut. "What do you mean?" "You'll know when it's close. You'll hear it first, and then you'll feel it," he turned, starting back down the trail. "Just don't stay too long." I watched him go, his words echoing in my mind. Part of me wanted to laugh it off as superstition, but the way he looked at me, like he'd seen the same thing I had last night, made it hard to dismiss. That evening, back at camp, the unease was worse. The forest felt like it was closing in, the trees towering higher than I remembered, the shadows deeper, darker. The wind had picked up, making the fire flicker and sputter, but it didn't drown out the sounds. The rustling came back, louder this time, and with it something else. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, circling the campsite. I grabbed my flashlight, shining it into the darkness, but the beam barely seemed to penetrate the trees. The footsteps stopped as soon as the light hit them, but when I moved the beam, they started again. I stood, turning in a slow circle, the flashlight in one hand and my knife in the other. My pulse was pounding, adrenaline kicking in. Every instinct I had screamed that something was wrong, that I wasn't alone out here. But no matter how hard I looked, I couldn't see anything. And then, just beyond the firelight, I saw it. A figure, tall and impossibly thin, standing between the trees. Its body was almost skeletal, its limbs too long, its head bent slightly as if it were watching me from above. Its eyes, or where its eyes should have been, were hollow, dark pits that stared right at me. My blood ran cold. I took a step back, my breath catching in my throat. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching, its presence pressing down on me like a weight. "Who are you?" I called out, my voice shaking despite myself. The figure didn't respond. It stayed still, silent, its form almost blending into the shadows. I raised my knife, backing toward the RV. The figure remained at the edge of the light, watching, waiting. I reached the door, yanked it open, and stumbled inside, slamming it shut behind me. For hours, I sat by the window, knife in hand, waiting for the figure to move. But it never did. It just stood there, barely visible in the darkness, its hollow eyes fixed on the RV. At dawn, the figure was gone, but the carvings had multiplied, dozens of them surrounding the campsite. The same tall, thin figures etched into the trees like a silent army. I didn't waste time. I packed up everything, threw it into the RV, and started the engine. As I drove away, the carvings seemed to watch me, following me down the narrow trail, their hollow eyes staring. I didn't stop until I was miles away from the Ader, the forest shrinking in the rearview mirror. But even as the trees thinned and the road stretched out in front of me, I couldn't shake the feeling that the Watcher was still out there, somewhere in those woods. It was still watching, and maybe it always would be. I've always liked the quiet of the road. No one asking questions, no one poking into your business, just miles of highway, the hum of the engine, and the occasional crackle of a distant voice on the CB. But that night, somewhere on Route 50 in the middle of Nevada, the silence felt different. Too quiet, too heavy. It had been days since I'd had a decent break. I'd left San Francisco with a load of building materials bound for Kansas City, figuring Route 50 would cut the travel time. They call it the loneliest road in America, and I've driven it enough times to know why. For hours at a time, you don't see a soul. Just endless desert dotted with mountains that never seem to get any closer. I was more tired than I wanted to admit. The kind of tired that sneaks up on you where your eyelids grow heavy and the lines on the road start to blur. Normally I'd push through, but something told me to pull over this time. I glanced at the clock and decided to hit the next rest stop I saw. A quick nap, I told myself, and I'd be good as new. I felt a wave of relief when I spotted the weathered sign for a rest stop 2 miles ahead. The stop wasn't marked on my map, which was odd, but these old highways have plenty of places that don't show up anymore. The place looked like it hadn't seen a decent coat of paint in a decade. The lights above the parking area flickered weakly, casting long shadows across the cracked asphalt. A beat-up picnic table and a few rusted trash bins were all that marked the stop. The restroom building sat off to the side, its windows dark, and the air around it felt heavy, like it hadn't been disturbed in years. I pulled the rig into the lot and killed the engine. Silence settled in around me, pressing through the windows. I leaned back in the driver's seat, rubbing my face. I just needed a few hours of sleep and I'd be good to go. But before I could settle in, nature called. Typical. With a sigh, I grabbed my flashlight and climbed out of the cab. The night air was cold, much colder than I'd expected for Nevada, and the wind carried a strange scent, dry with an underlying hint of something rotten. I wrinkled my nose but kept moving toward the restroom. The building was worse up close. Graffiti covered the exterior, but it wasn't the usual stuff, no names or crude drawings. These were symbols, spirals, triangles, strange geometric shapes I couldn't quite place. Some of them were carved deep into the wood, like they'd been there a long time. I pushed the door open, and the smell hit me harder inside, stronger than before. I flicked the light on, but the bulb overhead just buzzed and flickered weakly. I turned on my flashlight and swept it across the room. The place was empty, as I expected, but the walls were covered in more of those symbols, dozens of them, carved into the tiles, drawn on the mirrors. I did my business quickly, trying to ignore the feeling that those symbols were watching me, and made my way back out to the parking lot. That's when I saw the first figure. It was standing just beyond the reach of the flickering lights, a man in a heavy coat, his back to me, staring out into the desert. For a second, I considered calling out to him, but something about the way he stood there, so still, so quiet, made my gut twist. I stopped in my tracks, trying to decide if I should just get back in the truck and go, but the man didn't move. He didn't even seem to notice I was there. Maybe he was just another trucker, but I hadn't seen another rig on the road in hours. I took a step back toward my truck, keeping an eye on the figure. When I reached for the door handle, my fingers brushed something cold, too cold. I pulled my hand back, confused, and shone the flashlight on the handle. Symbols. Those same spirals and triangles scratched into the metal of my door. My heart started racing. I hadn't seen them there before. I would have noticed. I swallowed hard, scanning the lot, but the figure was gone. Just vanished. I fumbled with the door, pulling it open and climbing back into the cab as fast as I could. I locked the doors and sat there, trying to steady my breathing, trying to shake off the feeling that something was terribly wrong. I'd driven across the country dozens of times, stopped in every kind of rundown, creepy rest stop imaginable, but nothing like this. The radio crackled to life suddenly, nearly making me jump out of my skin. For a second, I thought it was just picking up static, but then a voice broke through. Low, distorted. Frank. My heart skipped a beat. I snatched the CB mic. Who is this? Silence. I stared at the radio, waiting, but the voice didn't come back. I tried to convince myself I'd imagined it, that my mind was playing tricks on me, but the sound of my name, it was too clear. I glanced out the window again, half expecting to see the man in the coat, but the lot was empty. The only movement was the weak flicker of the overhead lights. Still, that rotten smell lingered, hanging in the air like a warning. I was about to start the engine and get the hell out of there when I noticed something in the rearview mirror. There was another figure now, standing near the restrooms. This one was closer. I couldn't make out their face in the dim light, but they were staring right at me. Not moving, not blinking, just watching. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to leave, but when I reached for the ignition, the engine sputtered and died before it could even turn over. I tried again. Nothing. The lights on the dashboard flickered weakly before going out altogether. Come on, I muttered, trying to stay calm. Don't do this to me now. I grabbed my phone to call for help, but there was no signal, no bars, no nothing. The figure was still there, closer now. Another figure appeared near the picnic table, and then another by the trash bins. They didn't approach, but they were closing in, little by little. My mouth was dry. I fumbled for the flashlight and shone it toward the restroom, hoping to get a better look at the figures. The beam of light cut through the dark, but when it hit the first figure, they were gone, just gone. I swept the light across the lot, but all the figures had disappeared. Every single one. I didn't waste any more time. If my truck wasn't going to start, I'd fix it in the morning. For now, I just needed to get out of here, on foot if I had to. I grabbed the toolbox from under the seat, just in case, and jumped down from the cab. That's when I noticed something else on the side of my truck. Etched into the paint was one of those symbols. Fresh. I could smell the metallic tang of scratched metal. It was the same spirals and triangles I'd seen in the bathroom, the same ones that had been on the door handle. The smell hit me again, stronger now. I turned, shining the flashlight toward the restroom, and that's when I saw it. The symbols were glowing. A faint, sickly light pulsed from the walls of the building, the carvings and scratches now alive with some kind of energy. The ground beneath my feet vibrated, a low hum building in my chest. I stumbled back toward the truck, my flashlight shaking in my grip, but the lights in the building grew brighter, casting long, flickering shadows across the lot. And then I heard the voice again. Frank. I whipped around, scanning the empty lot, but there was no one there. No figures, no man in the coat, just the voice coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. Frank, you need to stay. I felt a cold sweat break out across my forehead. My pulse pounded in my ears, but I kept moving, trying to get back into the cab. But the symbols, they were on my truck now, glowing with the same eerie light. The handle felt like ice under my fingers. The wind picked up, howling across the lot, carrying whispers with it. Low, urgent voices layered on top of each other, impossible to understand, but they felt old, ancient. I was frozen in place, trapped between the truck and whatever the hell was happening in that restroom. The lights, the symbols, the voices. I didn't know what to make of any of it, but I knew one thing. I had to leave now. The truck groaned as I climbed back into the cab, and I turned the key one last time, praying it would start. The engine sputtered, coughed, and finally roared to life. Without another thought, I slammed the truck into gear and floored it out of the lot, the tires skidding on the cracked asphalt. The rest stop disappeared in the rearview mirror. the glowing lights and symbols fading into the distance. As I drove down the highway, my hands trembling on the wheel, I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't escaped. The silence of the road was back, but it wasn't the same. The weight of those symbols, the voice, it lingered, and I knew deep down that whatever was tied to that rest stop wasn't finished with me. I don't stop on Route 50 anymore, not after that night. Some places are better left in the past. I had been driving for hours, the Mojave Desert stretching endlessly around me, barren and vast under the relentless sun. The road was long behind me now, just an empty trail of dust leading out to nowhere. Perfect. This was exactly what I needed, a break from work, from the grind, from people. Out here, there was nothing but silence and space. No cell towers, no deadlines, no distractions. Just me and the desert. I pulled the RV to a stop near a rocky outcrop and stepped out. The air was dry and still, the kind of quiet that felt like it was pressing down on you. I took a deep breath, inhaling the warm scent of sand and stone. This was my escape. No buzzing phone, no frantic emails, just the open sky and the endless horizon. I set up camp quickly, parking the RV in the shade of the rock formation and pulling out my gear. I wanted to explore before the light faded. There was something about the desert that always fascinated me, the way the landscape shifted from harsh to beautiful in a matter of hours. But right now, I was focused on one thing: silence. After weeks of being glued to my phone and running from meeting to meeting, the thought of being completely disconnected was a relief. No cell reception out here, no GPS signal, just me and the land. As I unpacked, I heard it. A faint sound, almost too soft to notice. A rhythmic beeping. At first, I thought it was something inside the RV, maybe an alarm or a piece of equipment malfunctioning, but after a quick check of my gear, everything seemed fine. The sound persisted though, steady and faint like a pulse just beneath the surface. I stepped outside, trying to pinpoint where it was coming from, but the desert was quiet. The only sound was the faint wind rustling through the rocks. I brushed it off, assuming it was some distant echo of the RV's systems, and finished setting up camp. As the sun began to sink below the horizon, I felt that familiar sense of calm wash over me. This was why I came here, to escape, to let my mind breathe. But that night, the beeping came back. I was sitting by the campfire watching the flames flicker against the darkening sky when the sound returned, clearer this time. It was still faint but persistent, a soft rhythmic pulse like something distant calling out. I stood, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. I wasn't the type to get spooked easily. Logic and reason were my tools, and they had served me well in the world of engineering. But there was something about the sound, something that felt wrong. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped away from the fire into the darkness. The desert stretched out before me, vast and empty. I started walking, following the faint sound. The rhythmic pulse grew louder as I moved away from the RV. For a while, I saw nothing but sand and rock. The beeping seemed to fade, then grow louder again, like it was moving with me, always just out of reach. I kept walking, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the night, but every time I thought I was getting closer, the sound slipped away. Finally, I stopped. My pulse was racing now, my breath coming in short, sharp bursts. The beeping had faded again, leaving me standing alone in the middle of the desert. The silence around me was heavy, almost suffocating. I turned back toward the RV. The fire still glowed faintly in the distance as I walked. The beeping returned, faint but steady, like a distant heartbeat. The next morning, the sound was gone. The desert was still quiet, as if nothing had happened. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Isolation could do that. The vast emptiness of the desert, the absence of any familiar sounds, it could mess with your head. I decided to hike further out, hoping to clear my mind. The landscape stretched endlessly in every direction, the sun already beating down on the sand. I grabbed my gear, making sure I had plenty of water, and started walking toward a rocky ridge I had spotted in the distance. Halfway there, I saw him, a man walking toward me from the opposite direction, his figure small against the endless desert. I hadn't expected to see anyone out here. This was a remote area, far off the beaten path. As the figure grew closer, I could make out an older man, his clothes worn and dusty, his face lined and weathered from the sun. "Hey," I called out, raising a hand as we approached each other. The man nodded, his eyes distant, almost vacant. "You camping out here alone?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Yeah, just me," I said, a little taken aback by his bluntness. "I've been walking for days," he said, his eyes scanning the horizon. "You heard it yet? The signal?" I blinked, unsure if I had heard him right. "The signal?" He nodded, his expression grim. "You'll hear it. Once you hear it, you can't get it out of your head. I've been following it for days. It doesn't stop." A chill ran down my spine. "What are you talking about?" The man glanced around nervously, as if the desert itself was listening. "There's something out here, something that's been broadcasting for years that it gets inside your head. Starts with the beeping, then it gets louder. You'll see." I stared at him, unsure of what to say. He looked dehydrated, sunburned, like he'd been wandering the desert for days without rest. I offered him some water, but he shook his head and started walking again, heading back the way he came, without another word. I stood there, watching him disappear into the distance, his words echoing in my mind. "Once you hear it, it doesn't stop." That night, the beeping was louder. I couldn't ignore it anymore. The sound pulsed through the silence, steady and rhythmic, like it was coming from somewhere deep beneath the earth. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, the sound was there, burrowing into my mind. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my gear, flashlight, GPS, water, and set out into the desert. I had to find the source. I had to know what was causing the sound. The desert was pitch black, the sky filled with stars. My flashlight cut through the darkness, the beam dancing across the rocks and sand as I followed the beeping. It was louder now, almost frantic, like it was pulling me toward something. The GPS was acting strange, flickering in and out, as if the signal was being disrupted. But I kept moving, my footsteps crunching in the sand. The beeping grew louder with every step. After what felt like hours, I saw it. A structure, half buried in the sand. A bunker or a weather station, long abandoned. The beeping was deafening now, emanating from somewhere inside. I hesitated, standing at the entrance of the bunker. The door was ajar, rusted and creaking in the wind. Everything in me screamed to turn back, to leave and forget about the sound. But I couldn't. The signal was pulling me in. I stepped inside. The air in the bunker was stale, suffocating. My flashlight flickered as I moved through the narrow corridor, the walls lined with rusted equipment and faded maps. The beeping was louder now, echoing through the metal walls, vibrating in my chest. At the end of the corridor, I found a small room. In the center, there was an old radio tower, its equipment still faintly powered by some unknown source. But that wasn't what caught my attention. On the walls were symbols, strange, intricate markings that looked like they had been carved into the metal. They spiraled outward, that converging on the radio tower as if they were feeding into it. In the corner of the room, I found a journal. Its pages were yellowed and brittle. The entries were short, scrawled in frantic handwriting. They talked about the signal, how it started with the beeping, how it got louder, how it never stopped. "It gets inside your head," one entry read. "It's not just a sound, it's alive." As I read, the beeping shifted, turning into a high-pitched screech that pierced through my skull. I dropped the journal, clutching my head as the sound rattled through my brain. It wasn't just a signal, it was something more, something that had been waiting, broadcasting, pulling people in. I had to get out. I stumbled out of the bunker, the sound still ringing in my ears. The desert spun around me. I ran, my legs weak, my mind spinning. The landscape warped, the rocks and sand shifting as if the desert itself was alive, moving with the signal. When I finally made it back to the RV, I collapsed inside, my head pounding. The beeping was now a constant, dull hum in the back of my mind. I left the desert the next morning, driving as fast as I could. The beeping was still faint, but persistent. I didn't look back. Even now, days later, back in the city, I can still hear it. A faint, rhythmic pulse in the back of my mind. Always there, always calling me back. The signal isn't done with me yet. I'm Donovan Huxley, and back in 2022, I decided to take my RV up to the remote stretches of the Porcupine Mountains in Michigan's Upper Peninsula. As a graphic designer more acquainted with pixels than pine trees, I thought a solo trip might spark some creativity, or at least give me a funny story to tell at the next office party. I packed more gadgets than gear, thinking my tablet and a portable Wi-Fi hotspot would be enough to keep me connected. My buddies laughed, saying I'd be back within a day begging for a decent latte, but I was determined to prove them wrong. After all, how hard could camping be when your bed has wheels and there's a mini fridge stocked with craft beer? The drive was uneventful, save for the occasional deer darting across the winding roads. The autumn leaves painted the landscape in fiery hues, and I couldn't help but feel a surge of optimism. Maybe this nature thing wasn't so bad after all. I pulled into an isolated campground, the kind where you have to fill out a slip and drop it into a box because there's no ranger station. As I set up, a beat-up pickup truck rattled past, its driver giving me a long, scrutinizing stare. He was an older man with a weathered face, sporting a beard that could house a family of sparrows. I gave a friendly wave, but he just spat out the window and drove on. "Well, nice to meet you too," I muttered, shaking my head. Night fell quicker than I expected. I settled into my RV, flicking on the interior lights and firing up a movie on my tablet. Halfway through, the Wi-Fi cut out. Figures. I decided to step outside to get some fresh air. The silence was thick, broken only by the rustling of leaves and the distant hoots of owls. Taking a deep breath, I savored the crisp air when I noticed a faint glow deeper in the woods. Curiosity piqued, I grabbed my flashlight. This is how horror movies start, I joked to myself, but ventured forth anyway. As I approached, the glow sharpened into the flicker of a campfire. There, in a small clearing, stood a group of people in a circle, their faces obscured by hooded cloaks. Great, I've stumbled upon a cult meeting. Just my luck, I thought. I was about to back away slowly when one of them turned abruptly, revealing a pale face with sharp features. His eyes locked onto mine, and a sly grin spread across his lips. Well, looks like we have an unexpected guest, he called out. The others turned in unison, their gazes piercing through the darkness. Sorry to intrude, I stammered. I was just enjoying a walk and saw your fire. Join us, he said, motioning with a gloved hand. We were just getting started. Every rational part of me screamed to leave, but politeness overrode common sense. Sure, why not? I said, walking into the clearing. The warmth of the fire did little to ease the chill crawling up my spine. Up close, their cloaks appeared tattered, and a strange symbol was stitched onto the fabric, a triangle entwined with a serpent. We're celebrating the harvest, another member said, her voice smooth like honey but with an unsettling undertone. Cool. I didn't bring any snacks, though, I quipped, hoping humor might lighten the mood. No matter, the leader replied. We have plenty to share. They began chanting in a language I didn't recognize. The flames danced higher, casting eerie shadows that seemed to move independently of their sources. I glanced around, noticing that there were no tents or supplies, just the fire and the people. Well, this has been fun, but I should probably head back, I said, taking a step backward. Stay, the leader insisted, his tone leaving no room for argument. The ritual is incomplete without a proper offering. Offering? I laughed nervously. I think I'll pass on that. Before I could turn, two members grabbed my arms with a grip stronger than their slender frames suggested. Panic surged through me. Hey, let go! The leader approached, pulling back his hood to reveal a bald head etched with scars forming the same symbol on their cloaks. You stumbled upon us for a reason. The woods guide those who are meant to join. I struggled, but their hold tightened. Look, I'm just a guy who got lost. I didn't see anything. Precisely, he smiled. You're nobody, a perfect vessel. They dragged me toward a makeshift altar, a flat stone slab stained dark. My heart pounded as adrenaline kicked in. In a burst of desperation, I stomped hard on the foot of the person to my right. He yelped, loosening his grip just enough for me to wrench free. Without thinking, I bolted into the woods. Branches whipped against my face as I ran blindly, the chants morphing into shouts behind me. My lungs burned, but fear propelled me forward. I could hear footsteps gaining, leaves crunching under heavy boots. Help! I screamed into the void, knowing full well that I was miles from anyone who could hear. Suddenly, a blinding light flooded the area. Freeze! State police, a voice boomed. The leader recoiled as officers emerged from all sides, weapons drawn. Stunned, I watched as they apprehended the cult members one by one. An officer helped me to my feet. Are you okay? I think so, I gasped. How did you find me? We've been tracking this group for months, he explained. Got a tip they were operating in this area. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. A scream pierced the night, a guttural, inhuman wail that didn't seem possible from a human throat. "What was that?" I whispered. The officer's face paled. "Stay here." He moved toward the sound, hand hovering over his holster. Against better judgment, I followed at a distance. The officers converged on a clearing where they found a grisly scene. A shallow pit filled with bones, some animal, others unmistakably human. The remains were arranged in grotesque patterns, and the stench was overwhelming. One of the officers retched. "Looks like we found their dumping ground," another muttered grimly. I stumbled back, bile rising in my throat. This wasn't just some harmless group of oddballs. They were killers. Maybe worse. The night stretched on as statements were taken and evidence collected. Eventually, they escorted me back to my RV. "We'll have someone keep an eye on you tonight," the officer assured me. "But you should be safe now." Safe, right? I nodded absently, still processing the night's events. Inside the RV, I locked every door and window, then double-checked them for good measure. Exhaustion hit me like a freight train, but sleep was a distant possibility. I sat at the small kitchenette table, nursing a cold beer, the kind of liquid courage that does nothing after the fact. Morning light seeped through the blinds, and with it came a knock on the door. I flinched but relaxed when I saw it was the officer from the night before. "Mind if we talk?" he asked. "Sure." I opened the door, and he stepped in, removing his hat. "We've identified the group's leader, named Silas Crowley," he said, flipping open a notebook. "Former anthropology professor who went off the grid after some controversial research." Controversial how? Obsession with ancient rituals, human sacrifices, the works. He attracted a following of like-minded individuals. We've been trying to pin him down for a while. A chill ran through me. "So I just stumbled into a homicidal maniac's backyard?" "Pretty much," he sighed. "You're lucky to be alive. Others weren't so fortunate." I swallowed hard, the reality settling in. What happens now? "Silas and his group are in custody. With your testimony, we can ensure they won't see the light of day for a long time." "Glad to hear it," I replied, meaning it. He gave a small nod. "If you remember anything else, give me a call." He handed me his card. After he left, I started packing up. The allure of the wilderness had lost its shine. As I secured the last of my gear, I noticed something tucked under the windshield wiper. A small folded piece of parchment. Heart pounding, I unfolded it to reveal a hand-drawn symbol, a triangle entwined with a serpent. Below it, scrawled in elegant script, were the words, "This isn't over." I scanned the tree line but saw nothing. Not willing to stick around to find out, I jumped into the driver's seat and fired up the engine. The RV roared to life, and I peeled out of the campsite faster than any posted speed limit would approve. The drive back was a blur. Every so often, I checked the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that beat-up pickup or a convoy of cloaked figures tailing me. But the road remained empty, save for the occasional semi-truck. Back in Chicago, life returned to a semblance of normalcy. I threw myself into work, using design projects as a distraction. But curiosity gnawed at me. Who exactly was Silas Crowley, and how had he managed to evade capture for so long? One night, unable to sleep, I dove into the depths of the internet. Articles, forum posts, and obscure websites painted a disturbing picture. Silas had been linked to mysterious disappearances across several states, always near remote areas. His followers were zealots, believing in some twisted form of immortality achieved through rituals involving unwitting participants. I came across a photo from an old university yearbook. There he was, clean-shaven, eyes sharp but not yet clouded by madness. A far cry from the scarred visage that haunted my memories. Beneath the photo was a list of his published works. One title stood out, Transcendence Through Sacrifice, an Anthropological Perspective. I clicked on a link leading to an abstract. It detailed ancient practices meant to bridge the gap between the mortal and the divine, often requiring a human conduit. Chillingly, it argued that such rituals were not acts of barbarism but profound spiritual endeavors. A notification popped up, a new email. Odd, considering the hour. The subject line read, "We will meet again." I hesitated before opening it. The message contained only a single image, the same symbol of the triangle and serpent. My stomach twisted. How did they find me? My mind raced. I hadn't given anyone my contact information, and the police assured me that all members were accounted for, except perhaps they weren't. Determined not to be a sitting duck, I reached out to the officer who had helped me, Detective Marcus Lee. His number went straight to voicemail. I left a message explaining the email and urged him to call me back. Days passed with no response. Then, a news report caught my attention. Detective Marcus Lee had been found dead in his home, the victim of an apparent suicide. But the details didn't add up. No note, no history of depression, just a decorated officer who suddenly took his own life. I knew better. Feeling cornered, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I wasn't about to let these people control my life. If they wanted a game of cat and mouse, I'd show them I wasn't easy prey. I revisited the forums, digging deeper into the network of connections surrounding Silas. A pattern emerged. The locations of past rituals formed a rough circle on the map, with Chicago unsettlingly close to the center. Late one night, my apartment buzzer sounded. Cautiously, I approached the intercom. "Who is it?" No response, just static. Then a voice whispered, "Time to complete the ritual, Donovan." Panic surged, but I steeled myself. "Funny, I was just thinking the same thing," I muttered. I hung up and grabbed the baseball bat I kept by the door, a relic from my high school days, more for nostalgia than anything else, but solid wood nonetheless. The hallway was quiet as I stepped out, scanning for any movement. The elevator dinged, and the doors slid open to reveal a cloaked figure. Without waiting, I charged, swinging the bat with every ounce of fear and rage pent up inside me. The figure dodged, but not fast enough. The bat connected with a sickening thud, and he crumpled to the ground. I pulled back the hood to reveal a young man, eyes wide with shock. He wasn't Silas, but he wore the same symbol around his neck. Footsteps echoed from the stairwell. More were coming. I dashed back into my apartment, locking the door and wedging a chair under the handle. My mind raced. They weren't going to stop unless I stopped them. That's when an idea struck me. Rushing to my computer, I accessed the security system controls for the building. A perk of designing the software for the management company. I activated the fire alarm, triggering an automatic call to the fire department and unlocking all exit doors. Within minutes, the halls filled with blaring sirens and the stomping of residents evacuating. The cult members would be lost in the chaos, their anonymity stripped away. I joined the crowd heading downstairs, blending in. Outside, fire trucks arrived and firefighters began their sweep. I spotted a few cloaked figures slipping away into the night but didn't pursue them. The police arrived shortly after. I gave my statement, omitting certain details to avoid sounding like a lunatic. They assured me they'd investigate. Exhausted, I checked into a hotel under an alias. Sleep came fitfully, haunted by fragmented dreams. The next morning, a news alert pinged on my phone. Notorious cult leader Silas Crowley found dead in apparent ritual suicide. The article detailed how he was discovered in an abandoned warehouse, surrounded by symbols and paraphernalia. A sense of relief washed over me, tempered by skepticism. It seemed too convenient. A knock at the door startled me. I peered through the peephole to see a woman in a business suit holding a badge. "Mr. Huxley, FBI, we need to talk." I opened the door cautiously. "How did you find me?" "We have our ways," she replied curtly. "May I come in?" I nodded, stepping aside. She sat down, fixing me with a piercing gaze. "Silas Crowley is dead, but his followers are still at large. We believe you're a target." "Tell me something I don't know," I sighed. "We can offer you protection, but we need full cooperation." I considered her offer. "Fine. What do you need?" "Everything you know about the cult's operations, contacts you've made, any information that could help us dismantle what's left." For the next several hours, I recounted every detail from the campsite to the emails. As I spoke, a thought nagged at me. If Silas is dead, who sent the email? She paused. "That's what we're trying to figure out. His second in command, Lydia Marks, is just as dangerous, if not more." "Not entirely. With your help, we can set a trap." "Use me as bait?" She met my gaze steadily. "Essentially." I leaned back, weighing my options. Running hadn't worked, and hiding was a temporary fix at best. "All right, let's do it." Plans were set. I was to resume my normal life under surveillance. Days passed without incident. I almost began to believe the nightmare was over. Then, one evening, as I returned home, the lights flickered ominously. The air felt heavy. "Showtime," I muttered. I entered cautiously. The living room was empty, but a faint sound came from the bedroom, a soft chanting. I signaled discreetly, hoping the agents were monitoring. Pushing the door open, I found Lydia standing by the window, silhouetted against the city lights. "Welcome home, Donovan," she purred. "Can't say I was expecting guests." She smiled coldly. "Silas underestimated you. I won't make the same mistake." "Funny, I was just thinking the same thing about you cult types." She stepped forward. "Join us willingly, and your transition will be painless." Tempting, but I'll pass. She lunged, but before she could reach me, agents burst in, weapons drawn. "Freeze!" Lydia's eyes flashed with fury. In a swift motion, she pulled a knife from her sleeve. Shots rang out, and she collapsed, the blade clattering to the floor. As they secured the scene, I stood there, a whirlwind of emotions swirling but none taking hold. The agent from before approached. "It's over," I nodded. "Is it?" She gave a half smile. "For now." Weeks later, life settled into a new normal. The emails stopped and the surveillance was lifted. The FBI assured me the cult had been dismantled. One evening, as I sorted through my mail, I found an unmarked envelope. Inside was a photograph of Silas and Lydia standing in front of a farmhouse, with me in the background, unaware. Scrawled on the back were the words, "See you soon." I stared at it, a mix of dread and resignation. Maybe the cycle wasn't broken, but at least I knew what I was up against. In that moment, I realized Silas Crowley wasn't just a man, but the embodiment of an idea, one that wouldn't die easily. But neither would I. My name is Michael Campbell, and I'm 29 years old. I've always loved the outdoors, camping, hiking, being surrounded by the quiet beauty of nature. But what happened in the Monongahela National Forest last October changed the way I see the wilderness forever. It was supposed to be a weekend trip, a chance to reconnect with old friends and prove to myself that I could still find peace out there, even after everything I'd been through. Instead, it turned into a nightmare. It started as a casual idea during a group chat. Ryan Morales, my best friend from college, suggested we tackle an unmarked trail near Crum Knob. Breathtaking views, barely anyone around, he'd said. That was all Ryan needed to hear, an adventure far off the beaten path. Lila Barnes, the mediator of our trio, had been hesitant but relented. She was the sensitive type, a believer in energy and spirits, but she loved the idea of spending time with us. And me? I just wanted to prove I wasn't afraid anymore. The morning we arrived, the trailhead was everything Ryan had promised, isolated and overgrown, the kind of place most people wouldn't bother with. I double-checked my gear. A good sleeping bag, weatherproof tent, high-powered flashlight, and enough food to last us longer than we planned to stay. Ryan, of course, had packed light, too light. "You brought that?" I said, eyeing his flimsy-looking sleeping bag. "It's fine, Michael," he replied with a grin. "I'm not planning to freeze to death." Lila rolled her eyes. "You're going to complain the whole time, aren't you?" We set off late morning, the sun filtering through the dense canopy of the forest. At first, everything felt normal. Birds chirped, leaves rustled in the breeze, and the smell of damp earth filled the air. The trail was rough, but I'd expected that. What I didn't expect was how quickly the atmosphere would change. By mid-afternoon, we were deep in the woods, and the familiar sounds of nature started to fade. The birds stopped singing. The trees, once so vibrant, seemed darker, almost menacing. Even the air felt heavier, like it was pressing down on us. Lila was the first to mention it. "Does it feel quieter to you guys?" she asked, her voice tinged with unease. Ryan laughed it off. "It's just the wind dying down. Don't psych yourself out." I wanted to believe him, but something about the silence wasn't natural. It wasn't just quiet. It was oppressive, like the forest itself was holding its breath. As the day wore on, the trail became harder to follow. Signs of human passage disappeared, replaced by thick underbrush and moss-covered rocks. My map was useless. Ryan teased me about overthinking, but when we came across a weathered wooden sign with the words "Turn Back" barely legible beneath layers of grime, even he fell silent. "It's probably just a joke," he said after a moment. "Someone trying to scare off hikers." Lila shook her head. "Feels like a warning." Despite my growing unease, I didn't want to back out. I needed to finish this hike to prove to myself that I could handle it. So we pressed on. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, the forest grew colder and darker. That night, we set up camp in a small clearing surrounded by towering trees. Ryan got the fire going while Lila and I prepared our tents. As we settled in for the night, the usual camaraderie returned. We joked, ate, and shared stories around the fire. For a moment, it felt like old times until we heard the scream. It came from deep in the woods, a shrill, piercing cry that froze me in place. Lila's face went pale, and Ryan stood up, flashlight in hand. "Probably an animal," he said, though his voice lacked its usual bravado. "No animal makes a sound like that," Lila whispered. We listened, straining to hear anything over the crackling of the fire. For a long moment, there was nothing. Then faintly I heard it, someone calling my name. Michael. It was a soft, lilting voice, barely audible but unmistakable. My stomach churned. It sounded like my brother Nate. He died when I was 16, lost in the woods during a family camping trip. I knew it couldn't be him, but the voice was so eerily familiar. "Did you hear that?" I asked. "Hear what?" Ryan said, scanning the trees with his flashlight. "It said my name," I insisted. "It sounded like." Before I could finish, Ryan's light flickered and died. "Damn thing's out of batteries," he muttered. We retreated to our tents after that, but sleep didn't come easily. The sounds outside, branches snapping, faint whispers, kept me awake. I gripped my flashlight tightly, my heart pounding with every noise. The next morning, we discovered something strange. Around our campsite were large footprints, almost human, but with elongated toes and a strange, claw-like shape at the end. They circled the fire pit and disappeared into the woods. Ryan tried to laugh it off, calling it a prank, but Lila and I weren't so sure. As we packed up to leave, the forest felt even more hostile. Shadows seemed to shift unnaturally, and the oppressive silence followed us. Then around noon, we heard it again, someone calling for help. "Ryan!" The voice was desperate, pleading. "That's me," Ryan said, stopping in his tracks. "No, it's not," Lila snapped. "You're right here. That's not you." The voice called out again, closer this time. Ryan, always the skeptic, marched toward the sound despite our protests. He disappeared into the trees, leaving Lila and me alone on the trail. Minutes passed, then an hour. When he finally returned, something about him was off. His skin was pale, his eyes distant. He spoke little, his usual confidence replaced by an eerie calm. Lila and I exchanged worried glances but didn't press him, not yet. As night fell, the tension between us grew. Lila whispered to me that she'd seen Ryan standing outside her tent the night before, staring into the woods. "I don't think it's him," she said, her voice shaking. "I think it's something else." I wanted to dismiss her fear as paranoia, but when Ryan spoke, his voice sounded wrong. There was a guttural edge to it, something not quite human. That night, I barely slept, my mind racing with possibilities. Was he possessed? Was I imagining things? The next day, everything unraveled. Ryan's behavior grew stranger. He refused to eat, instead watching us with an intensity that made my skin crawl. At one point, he muttered something under his breath, words I couldn't understand, but that sent a chill down my spine. Lila was the first to snap. "You're not Ryan," she said, backing away from him. "What are you?" He laughed, a low, hollow sound that echoed through the trees. "You don't want to know." That was the moment I knew we had to leave. But Ryan, or whatever he'd become, wasn't going to let us go easily. As we packed, he stood between us and the trail, his grin stretching impossibly wide. His eyes were hollow, black pits that seemed to swallow the light. "You can't leave," he said. "Not yet." When he lunged, I didn't think, I just acted. I grabbed the canister of fuel from my pack and hurled it at him, igniting it with my lighter. Flames roared to life, spreading quickly through the dry brush. Ryan, or the thing wearing his face, shrieked and stumbled backward, disappearing into the inferno. Lila and I ran, the fire spreading behind us, consuming everything in its path. By the time we reached the trailhead, we were covered in soot and barely able to stand. Ryan was gone. We reported him missing, but no trace of him was ever found. Weeks later, I received a voicemail from his number. His voice, distorted and filled with static, whispered my name. "Michael, come back." I deleted it, but the memory lingers. The forest isn't just a place of beauty and solitude. It has its own rules, its own predators, and some things should never be found. My name is Mulligan, and this story happened to me in the summer of 2010. I was a camp counselor at Camp Pinewood, nestled in the heart of the Adirondacks. I've always loved the outdoors, and this job was my dream gig, spending the summer hiking, canoeing, and hanging out with kids. I grew up in a small town in upstate New York, so the woods felt like home. Plus, I needed the extra cash to help pay for my college tuition. Little did I know that this summer would be anything but ordinary. Camp Pinewood had been around since the 1920s, a sprawling piece of land with cabins, a mess hall, and a big lake where we taught the kids to swim and canoe. It was a beautiful place, full of towering pines and the smell of fresh pine needles. The camp was split into boys and girls sections, each with its own set of counselors. I was in charge of Cabin 6, a group of 12-year-old boys who were more interested in causing mischief than anything else. My fellow counselors were a mixed bunch. There was Cody, who was a year older than me and acted like he owned the place. Jenny, the arts and crafts counselor with a perpetual smile, and Andy, the quiet guy who played guitar by the campfire every night. We were a tight-knit group, and after the kids went to bed, we'd sit around, share stories, drink a couple of beers we kept hidden, and just enjoy the calm of the forest night. One night, after a particularly exhausting day of wrangling the kids through a hike up to Lookout Point, we gathered around the fire. The stars were out in full force, and the only sounds were the crackling of the fire and the occasional hoot of an owl. Andy started strumming his guitar, playing a soft tune that made the woods feel even more magical. As we were talking, Cody mentioned something about the old stories the local townsfolk used to tell. "They say these woods are haunted, he said, his eyes glinting in the firelight. "Haunted?" Jenny scoffed. "By what? Ghosts of campers who didn't clean their cabins?" "Nah," Cody replied, leaning in. "There's this old legend about a hermit who used to live around here. They say he went crazy, started kidnapping people and taking them to his cabin deep in the woods. No one ever found the cabin, though." I laughed, shaking my head. "Come on, Cody. You expect us to believe that? Sounds like a story you tell to scare the new counselors." Andy stopped playing his guitar and looked up. "I've heard that story, too. My grandpa used to tell it to me when I was a kid. He swore it was true." We all sat in silence for a moment, the crackling fire the only sound. Then Jenny broke the tension with a laugh. "Well, if I see any hermits tonight, I'll be sure to ask for directions to his cabin." The next few days went by without incident. We kept the kids busy with activities and didn't think much about Cody's story. But then, weird things started happening. It began with small stuff. Tools missing from the shed, food disappearing from the mess hall. At first, we thought it was just the kids playing pranks. But then, one night, one of the girls from Cabin 3 went missing. Her name was Lila, a sweet kid, a bit on the shy side. Her bunkmates said they saw her go to the bathroom in the middle of the night, but she never came back. We searched the entire camp, calling her name, our flashlights cutting through the darkness, but there was no sign of her. By dawn, we had to call the local authorities. The police showed up, just a couple of officers with stern faces and serious attitudes. They combed the area and asked us a million questions, but they didn't find anything either. It was like she had vanished into thin air. The camp directors decided to keep the camp running, hoping Lila would turn up, but the atmosphere had changed. The kids were on edge, and so were we. At night, the woods seemed darker, the sounds more ominous. We kept a closer eye on our campers, never letting them wander off alone. A few nights later, I was on night duty, making sure the boys were asleep and everything was in order. Around midnight, I heard something outside, a rustling noise, like someone moving through the underbrush. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out of the cabin, trying to pinpoint the source of the sound. "Who's there?" I called out, shining the light around. The beam cut through the darkness, but I didn't see anything. The noise had stopped. I stood there for a minute, listening, but all I could hear was the chirping of crickets and the distant hoot of an owl. I was about to head back inside when I caught a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye, a shadow moving between the trees. It was quick, barely there for a second, but it was enough to send a chill down my spine. The next morning, I told Cody and the others about it. They were skeptical, but Cody seemed intrigued. "Maybe it's the hermit," he said with a grin. "Or maybe Lila." "Not funny, Cody," Jenny snapped. "This is serious. We need to figure out what's going on." We decided to set up a watch system, taking turns staying up at night to keep an eye on things. It was exhausting, but we didn't want to take any chances. The kids needed to be safe. One night, it was my turn again. I was sitting by the fire, the only light in the darkness, when I heard it. The same rustling noise from before. This time, I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my flashlight and headed toward the sound, my heart pounding in my chest. As I got closer, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A figure hunched over, moving slowly through the trees. I shone the light on it, and for a brief moment I saw a face, wild eyes, unkempt hair, and a look of sheer madness. Then it was gone, disappearing into the darkness. I ran back to the cabin, my mind racing. I knew I had to tell the others. We needed to find this person, whoever they were, and make sure they didn't harm anyone else. The next day, we organized a search party. The police were already involved, but we couldn't just sit around and wait. Cody, Andy, and I, along with a couple of other counselors, headed into the woods, determined to find the source of the strange occurrences. We split up into pairs, each taking a different direction. Andy and I headed east, following a narrow trail that led deeper into the forest. The farther we went, the quieter it got, the sounds of the camp fading away. After about an hour of walking, we stumbled upon something that made my stomach churn. An old, dilapidated cabin hidden behind a thick curtain of vines and moss. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years, but there were fresh footprints in the dirt leading up to the door. Andy and I exchanged a glance. "This has to be it," he whispered. We approached cautiously, our flashlights illuminating the decaying wood and broken windows. The door was slightly ajar, creaking as we pushed it open. Inside, the air was stale, filled with the smell of rot and mildew. As we stepped inside, our flashlights revealed a scene straight out of a nightmare. Old furniture covered in dust, walls lined with strange symbols and drawings, and in the corner, a pile of clothes and blankets that looked like a makeshift bed. And then we saw her, Lila. She was lying on the floor, pale and unmoving. My heart sank. We rushed to her side, but it was too late. She was gone. We heard a noise behind us and turned to see the figure from the woods standing in the doorway, a crazed look in his eyes. He was holding a knife, his hand shaking as he stared at us. "Why did you come here?" he snarled. "This is my home." "You shouldn't have come here." Andy and I backed away slowly, trying to keep our distance from the man. "We don't want any trouble," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We just want to leave." But the man didn't listen. He lunged at us, the knife glinting in the flashlight beam. Andy managed to dodge out of the way, but I wasn't so lucky. The knife caught me in the arm and I cried out in pain. Andy grabbed a broken piece of wood from the floor and swung it at the man, hitting him in the side. The man stumbled, giving us a chance to make a run for it. We bolted out of the cabin, our hearts pounding as we raced back toward the camp. When we finally made it back, we were out of breath and covered in sweat. We told the others what had happened, and the police were called in immediately. They found the cabin and the man, who turned out to be a local who had gone off the grid years ago. He was arrested and taken away, but the damage had already been done. The camp was shut down early that summer. The parents were notified, and the kids were sent home. It was a somber end to what was supposed to be a fun and carefree time. Lila's family was devastated, and the rest of us were left with the haunting memories of what had happened. I still think about that summer sometimes, especially when I'm out in the woods. The forest doesn't feel as safe as it used to, and I can't shake the image of that man's wild eyes. But life goes on. I'm back in college now, studying to be a teacher. Maybe one day I'll work at a camp again, but for now I'm content to stick to the classroom. As for Camp Pinewood, it's still there, abandoned and overgrown. Some say it's haunted by Lila's spirit, but I don't believe in ghosts. What happened that summer was real, and that's enough to keep me away. Looking back, I realize how close we all came to a far worse outcome. It makes me appreciate the little things more, like a quiet night or a simple walk in the park. Life is fragile and it can change in an instant, but it also goes on, and we have to find a way to move forward, no matter how dark the past might be. I'd always thought that road trips were a great way to clear my head. Growing up in Chicago, I'd gotten used to the bustling noise and constant movement, but sometimes I needed to escape the chaos and find a bit of peace. That's why I found myself driving through the remote back roads of West Virginia. My name is Byron Chadwick, and I was looking for a bit of solitude. I guess I found more than I'd bargained for. The trip had started out fine. I'd left Chicago at the crack of dawn with the goal of reaching a quaint little town called Harper's Ferry by sunset. The roads were winding, and my old Chevy's radio only picked up static, but the silence was welcome. I was deep into the countryside by noon, surrounded by thick forests and the occasional farm. The GPS on my phone had been working fine until I hit a particularly dense part of the forest. That's when the signal dropped. No big deal, I thought. I downloaded the map earlier. I could navigate without a problem. But then I took a wrong turn. And another. Before I knew it, I was completely off course. I wasn't too worried. These things happened. I just had to find my way back to the main road. As I drove deeper into the forest, the sun started to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows that made the scenery even more eerie. I decided to stop and ask for directions at the next house I saw. That's when I came across an old dilapidated farmhouse. It looked abandoned, but there was a light on inside. I pulled up the driveway and killed the engine. The place gave off an unsettling vibe, but I was out of options. I walked up to the door and knocked. No answer. I knocked again, louder this time. After a few moments, the door creaked open, revealing a middle-aged man with a gaunt face and unkempt hair. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice raspy. "Yeah, I'm lost," I replied. "Can you tell me how to get back to the main road?" He stared at me for a moment, then stepped aside. "Come in, I'll get you a map." I hesitated, but stepped inside. The house was dark and smelled musty, like it hadn't been lived in for a long time. The man disappeared into another room, leaving me alone in the dimly lit hallway. As I waited, I heard a faint noise coming from the basement. It sounded like a whimper. Curiosity got the better of me. I moved toward the sound, finding a door that led to the basement. I opened it slowly, the creaking hinges echoing in the quiet house. The smell hit me first, rotting flesh and decay. I gagged, but my curiosity pushed me forward. I descended the stairs, the darkness enveloping me as I went deeper. The whimpering grew louder, more desperate. I reached the bottom and flicked on the light switch. The sight that met me was like something out of a nightmare. There were cages, rusty and old, lining the walls. Inside them were people, emaciated, dirty, and terrified. Some were unconscious, others were crying softly. My heart pounded in my chest. What the hell was going on here? Before I could react, I felt a heavy blow to the back of my head. I collapsed to the ground, my vision blurring. The last thing I saw before losing consciousness was the man standing over me, a sinister grin on his face. I woke up in one of the cages, my head throbbing. I tried to move, but my hands and feet were bound. Panic set in as I realized the gravity of my situation. I wasn't just lost anymore, I was a prisoner. Hours passed, or maybe it was days. Time seemed to blur together in that dark, stinking basement. The other captives were too weak to speak, their spirits broken. I knew I had to get out of there, but I needed a plan. One day, the man came down with his family, 2 men and a woman, all as twisted and deranged as he was. They carried knives and machetes, their intentions clear. They'd come to take one of us to do God knows what. I watched in horror as they dragged a young woman out of her cage, her screams piercing the silence. The door was left ajar, a small sliver of hope. I waited until they were distracted, then used all my strength to break free of my bindings. My wrists bled as I worked the rope loose, but I didn't care. I had to move fast. I slipped out of the cage and made my way to the door. The family was busy with their sick ritual, giving me just enough time to sneak past them. I ran up the stairs, my heart pounding, adrenaline fueling my every step. Once outside, I sprinted to my car, praying it would start. The engine roared to life, and I sped away, not daring to look back. I drove until I found a gas station, bursting through the door and begging the clerk to call the police. The authorities arrived quickly, and I led them back to the farmhouse. What they found there was enough to make seasoned officers turn pale. The basement was a scene of utter horror, but the captives were rescued and the family was arrested. I learned later that the farmhouse had been abandoned for years before that twisted family moved in. They had been preying on travelers, people who wouldn't be missed. I was lucky to escape with my life, The police took my statement, and I was free to go. I got back into my car, the relief washing over me as I drove away from that hellish place. The road stretched out before me, a promise of safety and normalcy. The farmhouse was demolished, its dark history buried beneath the rubble. The captives were taken to the hospital, and I went back to Chicago, grateful to be alive. I never took a road trip again.